our conference. We met yesterday to discuss the concept of common security, what it means, and its history. And this morning we had regional discussions with breakout sessions for different parts of Asia. And I look forward to listening to some of the conclusions from those discussions in the last session of today, before our another fourth session of regional discussions for North America, Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa that will take part or start at 16:00 CET this afternoon. But before we do that, we are going to discuss now the urgency of common security, because as you all know, we have there is crisis all around us. We are on the edge of climate collapse. There is a rising inequality, rising authoritarianism, and these are borderless threats. Yet governments pour more than $2 trillion a year into weapons while cutting on social spendings. The result is a world where security means walls and missiles, and not healthcare or clean water or solidarity, social justice, climate justice. Fear divides us when we need unity the most. But there is another way. Common security was born in the Cold War's darkest hour, and it tells us a radical truth that no one is safe until all are safe. It's not naive idealism, it's practical survival. Disarmament and climate justice, fair economies are not soft policies, and they are the only way to break the cycle of violence. So this conference is a call for action. The 2022 Common Security Report laid the blueprint, but now we must build and strengthen a movement, and that's why we are gathering here today. From trade unions to grassroots activists, we demand that we invest in people, that we center in human security, not state power, and that we champion diplomacy over destruction. So in order to help us do that, we have a lot of very interesting speakers today. But to start the discussion on the urgency of common security, I welcome Akiko Gono, President of ITUC, Philip Jennings, IPB's co-president, and Oscar Eneroth, who is the Secretary General of the Olof Palme International Center. Who would like to start? The floor is open.
So shall I start?
Yeah, Akiko.
Please do so.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And dear colleagues, it is an honor to be here with you at the Common Security 2025 conference. As the president of the International Trade Union Confederation, I welcome this opportunity to stand together with all of you in redefining security for the 21st century. The world is now in the period of uncertainty with the destruction of order of law. Peace and democracy, which we have been making efforts to establish after the Second World War, are in danger. So it is most appropriate to discuss common security now. For me, as a Japanese trade unionist, the theme of peace is deeply personal. My country has been firsthand the devastation of war. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain an eternal reminder of the horrors that human beings must never repeat. But Japan is also a symbol of resilience and reconstruction. From the ashes of destruction, we committed ourselves to peace, democracy, and prosperity through cooperation. It is this lesson that we must bring into today's discussion. Security cannot be built on military strength. True security means dignity, justice, cooperation, and it means common security. The international trade union movement has always been deeply connected to the peace movement. Since its founding, the ITUC has been a strong voice for social justice and conflict prevention. We firmly believe that security is not simply the absence of war. Security is having a decent job, fair wages, and a safe workplace. It is living in a society where people are not afraid of hunger, not afraid of depression, or not afraid of losing their rights. This conference provides a crucial space to reimagine how we build peace. The old idea about security based on military power and competition have failed us. We need a new approach. That is why ITUC is joining forces with you to defend democracy and the fundamental rights, to revitalize the multilateral system, and to seek a global commitment of disarmament. The world stands at a crossroads. We can choose a future of division, fear, and endless conflict, like we see every day being sold by autocrats around the world. Or we can choose cooperation, justice, and a new vision of security, one that ensures the well-being of all people, not just a privileged few. I think for everybody, the answer is very clear. We must remind the world that security is not about building walls and investing in weapons. It is about trust. It is about understanding that no nation is safe, its neighbor is insecure. We need dialogue, diplomacy, and disarmament. It is not about peace through strength. The world needs to choose the path of strength through peace. I sincerely hope that this important conference will bring concrete ideas and strategies for a more just and peaceful future as all. And I'm really looking for the very dynamic discussion for peace establishment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akiko. Philip Jennings, please.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to this second day, where the theme is the urgency of common security. And I was reminded of the quote of Martin Luther King, and I quote, when he said, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." And that was the message that I took yesterday from all the contributions that were made. We learned about the urgency of now and about how organizations are stepping up. We learned about the history and of common security succeeding in the most difficult of circumstances. Examples, messages about current flashpoints, and the divisions and dangers that exist today. The message is for one of a change of direction, but also for us to mobilize and for us to step up. I think the IPB is ready, and I know in the trade union movement, both in Europe at the ETUC and the ITUC, the whole question of peace and how we achieve peace in this divided world has now taken on a new and significant priority in their work and their thinking. The question we faced yesterday was, well, can common security help us redefine the security issues that confront us today? About the importance of joint survival, about the importance of cooperation with the adversary. And the message is, this message is still relevant and practical. It's not naive or far-fetched, that it is part of our vision of how we seek solutions. We have to operationalize common security, and that's why this is urgent, to take strategic competition to one of cooperation. Now, the overall situation does not look promising, an absence of political will. This past week, has shown us examples of economic warfare in the sense of this aggressive tariff policy emerging from the United States of America. After 2 days, the American financial system themselves turned against this economic warfare when they realized the human consequences of it. And we now have pushback and what I would call a 90-day ceasefire. If only we could get those bond markets mobilizing for peace. I would say that in the next 90 days, we have opportunities. This weekend, USA is sitting down with Iran. This is a common security thinking. You sit down with your adversary and try and resolve difficulties. In the next 90 days, we'd like to see peace come to Ukraine with a fair and just settlement, ceasefire in Gaza, and new commitments to symmetry with the USA and Russia and the USA and China. That is the urgency of now. We don't want to be too late. And we want these things to happen, not just in 90 days. And how fitting it would be, Akiko, if we could have this new beginning, this new departure before the 80th anniversary of the Nagasaki and Hiroshima nuclear weapon use in those nations. It therefore has to be a time of hope, a time of commitment from us. And I look forward to the high-level speeches and presentations we have this afternoon to address the urgency of now and why common security can work for us all and for this planet, this family of ours, together once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Oscar, please.
Yes, thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Philip and Akiko, for your intervention. Thank you also for all participants and for those that are from yesterday, but also the new ones from today. As Olof Palme stated 40 years ago when the first commission laid down the report, and at the time there were rock bottom relations of negativity between the superpowers, we then said that you can't create peace by creating more weapons and more weapons and more weapons. We need to reach a common security to talk to each other. That was also the thing we quoted in the report of 2022. And what we also quoted there was that this is not thing that we will finalize today or what we finalize then. This is on the road and the path that we need to do together, and that therefore it's so great, and I'm very proud that the Olof Palme International Center, together with the International Trade Union Confederation and the International Peace Bureau, are working with this together, and I look forward to continue that work even after today. And I'm eager to present more ideas on how we can develop this concept further on, because I think the state of the world is almost as bad as 40 years ago, or even worse, as Mr. Jennings just approached us. As for Palme Center, this is a key concern that we are based in, because we work in the values of Olof Palme, which is built on alliances between those that we agree with, but also alliances with those that we don't agree with. And therefore, this is a core activity for us. And what I also take with me from yesterday's, and I also thank the speakers from yesterday and their contribution, is again the crucial things of small states and their ability and also their responsibility, but also their chase for democratic values. And the small states are important that, and Olof Palme was a leader for that politics. With that said, I like to thank already now the speakers for today. I will follow that very closely, and I look forward to an interesting conference, and I look forward how we can continue our cooperation. So thank you all for listening, and let's get down to business.
Thank you, Oscar. Indeed, the stakes couldn't be higher. The next war, the next famine, or climate disaster are not inevitable. They are choices, and we must choose differently simply. So I'm happy to also to introduce all who can contribute to that discussion, and also remind that this is this conference is a step to also join forces. So the three organizers are us, but we also have other organizations behind us that endorse the concept of common security, and we hope to enlarge the family and join forces again to be stronger together. So now I hand over the word to Jerome Bernard, Political Director of ITUC, and Rainer Brown from IPB to moderate the next session with our dear speakers.
Thank you, Danielle. And hello from me from Brussels. Good morning, good evening elsewhere. I'm Jeroen Bernhard, Political Director with the ITUC. And I'm honored to moderate today's plenary session with Rainer, who you can see on the screen as well.
Yeah, my name is Rainer Braun. I'm the former co-president and executive director of the International Peace Bureau, and was a part of the community which were preparing the 22 report, Olaf Palme's second report, and also the regional report to Central Asia. And it's a pleasure for me to moderate together with Jerome this session.
So I think today we will share a privilege of listening to a very distinguished panel of leaders that will take us through different aspects of the urgent, as we've all heard, and necessary common security framework for the future. We will have a good hour and a half to listen to 5 fantastic high-level panelists with perspectives ranging from activist movements over international institutions and government, or a combination of those. And then afterwards, we will have time for an open and plenary and very inclusive discussion. So I think we are waiting for our first speaker, and I'm not sure whether she has already joined. If she has not, I think we still have to wait for another 5 minutes, because she will also have to leave after her intervention. And maybe I can already say a few words about the rest of the panel, so that you have an overview of what is to be expected. We will start by listening to Ciro Mauro, who is the director of the political unit in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General, so very much a UN perspective. We will have Shireen Jordi from the peace movement, WILP, in Lebanon, with a feminist activist perspective. We will listen to Jan Eliasson, a high-level diplomat and also former UN official. We will have Fabio Arias from CUT Colombia, the trade union there, and Annika Söder from the European Institute of Peace and also former Secretary of State of Sweden. Rainer, unless you want to say a few words, I suggest we wait for our first speaker.
You know, when we are waiting, we can also discuss a little bit between us. You know, for me, it's a great pleasure and honor to be a part of this conference. I think after 3 years, it is really important that the 3 organizers of the Common Security Report #2 are joining again together and promote the idea, the philosophy of common security in these difficult and dangerous times, and also underline the need of more actions and activities. I think when we are looking to the crisis in the world and to the wars in the world, none of these wars can be solved without the ideas of Olaf Palme, Willy Brandt, and Bruno Kreisky and others. This is really the background for finding ways out of these wars. And I think it is urgent that the political agenda in Europe learned these lessons and come back to the ideas and the philosophy of common security. So I can only congratulate the main organizers and the committee who was preparing this event for the power, but also for having the courage to organize such a conference in these times. And it is great that we could find so many speakers from different parts of the world and from very different and diverse organizations joining together to underline the urgency and the need of common security. So I hope this conference strengthens these ideas and opens the floor for more common activities. So thank you so much for doing it. And Jerome, thank you that we both can make this part of the conference happen, because, I think we both were a little bit in the beginning part of this discussion. And I'm very happy that, again, we both could come back to our past work and promote this work under new conditions today.
Yeah, absolutely, Rainer. It's good to see that we can reconvene and continue to build the movement. But there's certainly more work to be done. And if it's actually it's terrible to see what has developed since we organized the first Common Security Conference, and how the world has apparently not seen the necessity to build such a common security framework. We see the damage done all around us, and we see it further intensify. So we certainly need to further intensify our actions as well. I see a hand up, I think from Kuwait. If Mohammed, if you want to use the couple of minutes that we have before the first speaker.
Yes, you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
بداية أود أن أشكر جميع المتحدثين الذين سبقونا، وأن أكد على أن النقابات والعمال لهم دور كبير في حفظ الأمن والحماية، كونهم جزء أساسي من المجتمع، وأن العمال هم أساس الاستقرار لبناء الاقتصاد الوطني للدول. كما نؤكد على أن تكون النقابات والاتحادات عضواً فاعلاً في دائرة صنع القرار، وأيضاً أن تستمر في التوعية العمالية من خلال توجيه العمال التوجيه الصحيح. كما ضروري أن يكون للاتحادات والنقابات شراكات قوية مع المنظمات الدولية المختصة بالأمن والسلام، وأيضاً تكون متابعة لكافة القرارات والتوصيات والاتفاقيات التي تهم شؤون العمال. شكراً.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think we're in direct contact with the cabinet of Ms. Maura, who is asking us to hold. And I think she has now just joined. So that allows me to now finally kick off the conference. And to kick off this panel, we're very honored to welcome Ms. Siru Moro, who is the director of the political unit in the executive office of the UN Secretary General. So it's clear that in that position, she works at the very heart of global diplomacy, providing high-level political analysis and helping to shape how the UN responds to the ongoing and emerging crises around the world. So she will be setting for us the scene by exploring how today's shifting geopolitical landscape impacts on our shared vision of common security. Ms. Mora, it's great to have you with us. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's a very early morning in New York here, but I'm very happy to be able to join you today. This very interesting and timely topic. So just to kick off, I think it's safe to say that the world is in a transition process. Essentially transitioning from what we knew as a post-Cold War era of unipolarity to a more multipolar world, which a lot of people say we're not quite there yet, but we're certainly in transition. And I think it's important to say that multipolarity in and of itself is absolutely not a negative development. In fact, our sense is that it's created important opportunities for balance, for justice, inclusion, new leadership on the global stage. But it is a transition which carries with it certain risks. So without strong global institutions, it can create a degree of uncertainty. Some go as far as saying chaos even. So what we're witnessing is a transition that's characterized by a very fragmented geopolitical environment, increasing competition among major powers, loss of trust, I think, within societies across the board, but also between the global north, global south, if you want to use those characterizations, and certainly a waning unity of purpose among member states. So the power dynamics are, quite fragmented, with new poles of influence and economic blocs emerging. So quite an uncertain period. And all of this is happening in the context of a decline in multilateralism, which I think, most will be aware of. So the new fragmented geopolitical environment presents three significant challenges from our perspective. So one is the increasing danger of opportunism and miscalculation. So as geostrategic competition intensifies and relations between major powers become more strained, there's increasing danger of opportunism and miscalculation. The recent heightened rhetoric on the use of nuclear weapons, I think, is probably one of the most dramatic developments that we've seen. It's created an environment of increased armament in which military expenditures have reached record highs, and crucial arms controls frameworks, which were real gains, I think, real significant gains of the post-Cold War era, was a strengthening of these arms control frameworks. We're now seeing those being eroded. I think the second major sort of challenge that we see is the flouting of international law and erosion of norms and principles. So we've seen across the board a rise in instances of the lack of respect or violation of international law, including the UN Charter. We look at Russia's invasion of Ukraine, violations of international humanitarian law, as we've seen in Gaza, in Sudan, and the guardrails and norms and principles which have underpinned international relations for decades are being seriously challenged. And third is on the issue of impunity and lack of accountability. We've seen countries and actors big and small leverage this uncertain environment created by the transition that we've talked about to do as they wish. So we've seen that in a number of different places, Myanmar, the case of Sudan as well. And as the Secretary General has said before, impunity seems to be the name of the game. Now, against this backdrop, we have an increasingly divided and dysfunctional Security Council, which is often unable to address these challenges, as its key members are at the heart of the intense sort of geostrategic competition, intense division and competition. So this has left the UN basically with very limited leverage or power to resolve or prevent conflicts or keep peace. And that's evidenced by challenges that we've seen in relation to the peacekeeping environment, the UN peacekeeping environment, and with some of our special political missions in recent years. So more worryingly, competition, division, and lack of trust has been preventing us from taking effective steps to deal with new and emerging threats with existential dimensions, such as the climate crisis, the risk of uncontrolled artificial intelligence, and the weaponization of new technologies. So just a few words then on the way forward and building on, the Pact for the Future. So although our world is going through a time of turbulence and a period of transition, in the Pact for the Future, member states have recognized that, the multilateral system and its institutions, with the UN and its charter at the center, must be strengthened to keep pace with the changing world. On the peace and security front, the Pact for the Future reaffirmed the importance of conflict prevention and resolution and urged the Secretary General to actively deploy his good offices. But this would need to be cognizant of the global geopolitical landscape and be creatively applied in areas where the UN can bring some comparative advantage, as was the case with the Black Sea Grain Initiative, where I think a very sort of creative approach was deployed to identify a niche area for engagement, which I think had a global significant impact in terms of food security and in relation to other issues. So the Pact for the Future also signaled that a transformation in global governance is essential. And this is reflected in the promise made in the Pact for breakthrough on reforms to make the Security Council more reflective of today's world and, addressing the historic underrepresentation of Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. The Pact also laid the foundations for a fundamental review of UN peace operations to make them more effective in addressing existing and emerging challenges, while navigating a complex geopolitical context. Finally, the Pact also included the first agreed multilateral support for nuclear disarmament in more than a decade, while committing to steps to prevent an arms race in outer space and to govern the use of lethal autonomous weapons. So despite the fragmentation, the majority of states remain deeply invested in the multilateral system as essential to secure their sovereignty and independence and to moderate the behavior of major powers. The Charter of the United Nations and international law remains fundamental. And without these basic norms, international relations could descend into chaos. The Pact for the Future represents an important opportunity for member states to recommit to multilateralism and utilize the UN's mechanisms to navigate this complex and uncertain geopolitical transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And if you allow us, I think we would still hope to benefit for a couple of minutes from your time to reflect some more ideas. I'll also invite participants to write any specific questions in the chat so that we can pick up on them. But since you're addressing an audience of global movements, activist movements, including trade unionists from all around the world, people who are active in the peace movement, what do you think are opportunities that lie? We heard you say reshifting balances, geopolitical reshifting is not necessarily bad. It's also an opportunity to reshape global governance. You made several references to the Pact for the Future as being your roadmap for such reform. What do you think are key dates, activities, messages for a global activist movement that we can take with us in when we plan activities for the next years in support of this endeavor?
So I think there's some key, thank you. So I am indeed available to stay for a little while and take a couple of questions. So on this, I think I'm assuming that a number of your participants were involved, certainly in the run-up to the sort of Pact for the Future last year, and were involved in some of the sort of outreach and the different platforms that were established. And those continue to exist. And we're now very much in the implementation phase. And I would argue that probably, as with most things, the implementation phase is really where we need the biggest push, okay? Because all too often, I think, I can be very frank in this, we arrive at very good documents. The pact was negotiated, it's a negotiated intergovernmental document. So it has in it a lot of compromises, a lot of things where, we would have liked to see a higher level of ambition, but, member states were able to settle on certain things. So the implementation point, I would argue, is probably where the biggest push is required from platforms such as yours. And there are many different segments to the pact, many different sort of thematic areas, if you will. There's a peace and security component. There's a whole sort of international financial institutions component that's looking at sort of, debt and all of those kind of big issues. So forming constituencies that are thematic, that pick up on some of the key issues that you want to sort of push on, I would say is absolutely critical. Because change often comes, it's typically not from within, it's usually from without. So I'd strongly encourage you to do a very heavy mobilization in the thematic areas of interest, and try and raise the level of ambition and also ensure that what's been agreed upon has been implemented. And I would say because there'll be a reporting back certainly around the General Assembly that's coming up. So, the time is now, if you like, for greater organization, mobilization around the sort of core. But I think it's important to prioritize, okay? Because there's a huge menu of things. So it's not for me to say what priorities you should be interested in, but I think a prioritized approach is always better, where you can harness the energy and then push that forward with very clear benchmarks of what you want to achieve and register as successes as we get to this year's General Assembly. Thank you.
Maybe I can follow with another question. We have this year the 80 years anniversary of the United Nations, and I think we all are proud to have the United Nations, but we all also know the weakness of the United Nations in some points. What do we expect from the social movements when you are preparing the 80 years anniversary of the United Nations?
So, yes, indeed. This year is UN 80, and, it comes at a very kind of interesting, and I want to be frank here, a very challenging time for the organization. I think the Secretary General, so we're all clear that everyone agrees that, the UN remains absolutely necessary, more so than ever. But it is a UN, the core principles I don't think are in question at all. But it is a UN that needs its own adaptation for these emerging times. Okay, so this is very much, I think, from the Secretary General's perspective, and certainly when he started his mandate, his first mandate, he was very much clear that the UN needs to sort of constantly evolve, adapt to changing times. And I think in UN 80, in the way he's pitched it, and some of you may have seen, he's launched this initiative UN 80, which is very much about reflecting on, really three broad areas. One, efficiencies. Can we be more efficient? Okay, I don't think anyone would argue against that. There's scope, to be much more efficient in the way we conduct our business as the UN. And there are areas in which the Secretary General himself can take and will take decisions on how to improve effectiveness. I think the second key area, which is very much a question for member states, is the issue of mandates. Okay. Now, with respect to mandates, there's a feeling that it's an important time to reflect together with member states to really unpack all of these mandates over. I was talking to the team, some of the team working on this, thousands of mandates. Some of them not very realistic. Many of them very poorly, which are not matched up by resources. Okay, so very ambitious mandates, and the resources then, are not commensurate with what the organization is being asked to deliver. So that is very much an issue for member states to reflect on. What is it that you want our organization to achieve? So some level of prioritization, and what resources, are you willing to deploy to enable us to achieve these objectives through these mandates? Is there scope to rationalize in some cases and rethink? But this is very much for member states. But I would say that a constituency like yours should be very, very active in this conversation in terms of influencing member states to take, I think, I want to say rational decisions. I think I can say that, because sometimes you look at the mandates and then you look at what's provided to actually deliver, and there's a complete mismatch. So I think you can be very helpful in pushing for a level of realism, practicality, without losing ambition, but ensuring that resources match, what we're being asked to deliver. I think the third piece, which everyone's very interested in UN80, is this whole issue of a potential kind of restructuring in certain areas, which is, I think, more, can we structure ourselves differently? Can we rationalize a little bit more the structure to deliver better and more effectively? So those are the sort of three pieces that UN80 really is all about. It sounds, it may come across to some as very sort of bureaucratic, but I do think that it is time to reflect on how to improve our fit for purposeness, okay? Because it's directly related to, our ability to be relevant in today's world, be relevant to social movements and to everyone. So that's very much what UN80 is about, and this is the Secretary General's vision for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it resonates very much within our movement, the International Trade Union movement as well, in terms of how can we ensure that the UN focuses on its main deliverable, which is stability and peace in the world, and how it connects to our different agendas. You mentioned financing, certainly also for us a crucial issue in building that stability, and also connects to what you say in terms of the capacity as a secretariat to have the resources to deliver on what is expected from you. We have a comment in the chat that refers to the pervasive corporate capture of the UN and the risks that entails. So you're free to comment on it. And I want to finish with one very specific question that is popular in the chat as well, which refers to the Uniting for Peace resolution, and how it can be more effective or more effectively used so that the General Assembly can actually act when the Security Council is blocked. You've made reference to the blockages on that level. Any final thoughts or remarks on either of those two issues are welcome.
Thank you. Now, corporate capture, I'm very intrigued by this. I think I need to understand a little bit more. It was a very sort of a provocative statement to understand a little bit better what is meant here before I kind of respond to that. I think I need to have a bit of understanding what's meant. Now, on the issue of the General Assembly, I mean, you may be aware that there was a resolution passed in the General Assembly, which now compels members of the Security Council, when they deploy the veto, to have to explain why they've done so, which you think is a good development because it really does place onus, and we've seen the use of the veto, especially last time. I think for many of you follow this, on some of the most challenging contexts, particularly in relation to the conflict in Gaza. You'll have seen, and so increasingly, people will now have to explain why. So, I mean, it's not, as far as people would like to go in terms of the full reform of the Security Council, but it's certainly an important evolution. So the Secretary General continues to push very hard for the reform of the Council to reflect today's world, because, of course, a lot of these institutions were established when many countries in the world were still under colonial rule and not fully independent, so didn't benefit from the opportunity of constructing the multilateral system. So it's been constructed without really taking into account, several member states in this world. So this is an issue of equity. This is an issue of justice, which we now have at the heart of, the agenda, which is positive. We need a big push to finally get there. We've seen some of the evolutions which suggest, okay, everyone seems to be happy with expanding the composition of the Security Council, but it comes with a qualification that, yes, you can expand and increase the permanent members, but they will not have the right of veto, which is, I mean, well, you can make of that what you will, but I don't think that quite satisfies the requirement or the ambition that most people have. So there's a distance to go. But I think the rules of the game will remain the same. The council remains the council, the GA remains the GA. There are ways for it to, try and put pressure for reform, which it's doing. But the fundamental site for reform, I think, remains the Security Council, and we continue, and member states will have to continue to push for that. Now, I see there's a question here in relation to militarization and deterrence and threats as a road to world peace. Well, there's no doubt, as I said in my remarks, there's been a, dramatic increase in military expenditures. You see that I think, most acutely in the context of Europe and the Ukraine war, and now that's driven, and given the new geopolitical environment, a strong kind of push within Europe to increase defense expenditures, begin to think of improving its own sort of autonomy in that regard and reduce reliance on certain partners and certain frameworks. I think from their point of view, this is an existential matter. So there's no doubt this is what is happening. Now, does that improve deterrence? Debatable. I think that people would argue it either way. But I think it makes things more uncertain. I think our sense is that we have a heightened degree of uncertainty, and also, this is what I was saying, miscalculation for the first time. The kind of rhetoric around the use of nuclear weapons, which is, no one would have thought possible, I think 5 years prior, is very much part of the discourse now. So, I mean, this is a dramatic development, no doubt. So it doesn't seem to be lending itself towards deterrence. It rather all seems to be escalatory, if anything. So how to get back to a kind of level of strategic balance, I think this will take some time. But I think people are attempting to find a new balance in the world order, which is very different from what existed before. I mean, you had NATO and other blocs, and now we don't quite know where things are going to land. But I think the world is desperately in need of a new level of balance at a strategic level, but we're not there yet. And the pathway seems rather uncertain. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us so early. I think you've deserved the coffee. Thanks a lot for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you for joining. And dear colleagues and dear friends, it's a pleasure for me to announce the second speaker, Shireen Jodi, President of Gulf International League for Peace and Freedom from Lebanon. And she will speak about the global nature of common security, the Polycrisis and Interconnections. And I think Gulf has a long tradition in peace work and a long tradition in common work also with IPB and other organizations. So, Shireen, you are heavily welcome to our meeting. The floor is to you.
First, thank you so much for organizing this very important discussion, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really like Mr. Mayura's meeting discussion was rightly just before me to say that she led the perfect framework. I'm not going to repeat what is needed and what is wanted from us at the grassroots. I want to say that as we are having this talk on this very important talk on common security, what does this security mean to women in Gaza that are bombed on a daily basis in their own tents? while being refugees, not for the first time, not for the second time, not for the third time, not for the fourth time, not for the fifth time, with their continued refugees, and still they are being lacking the security that is needed. What is peace to women in Lebanon, especially in the south of Lebanon, after the signature of the ceasefire agreement in November 2024, after 2 months of deadly war? And what is it to have peace when we had the militarization of communication, telecommunication, just being spread without an alert? What is survivor to women in Sudan who are escaping lives and who are trying to find a rescue, who are trying to find their safe spaces, while at the same time committing suicide for the fear of being raped? What is it to have all the security for refugees, whether from Syria, whether from Iraq? I mean, this is the region that we're living in. What about women in Libya? So it's a compounded challenges that we are living in. So, and what does solidarity mean to us in this world when we just watch governments from the north sending more weapons to the region than sending food, or sending more sanctions than sending solutions? And when they're sending food, they're sending it within a humanitarian context. And a humanitarian context definitely lack development. So it's a vicious circle that we're moving around. Another thing I want to start with is that we notice in the different discussions that we are at many times being called resilient. And I want to tell you, we refuse to be called resilient. And we say this is another kind of discrimination that is being produced against us. We just want to live a normal life, away from fear, away from want, with dignity. And that's why we call for common security, and we call you, especially like peace community, feminist community, trade unions, don't call women in conflict areas as resilient. We do not want to be resilient, and we do not want to be framed as such. In Lebanon now, we're living in a very difficult times where we had like the ceasefire agreement. We have a monitoring of ceasefire, but still we have violations on a daily basis. And here we need to also to redo our narrative. We need to understand exactly how to start with our narrative and how to shift the narrative to include the proper terminology. We do not have a crisis, and we do not have a war. We have occupation. We have genocide. We have murderous acts of using military towards civilians in different areas of this MENA, or as you call it here as West Africa. I want to focus my my talk on mainly four points, and how I see this issue of the global into local, and talk about the local without talking about the global, and we cannot talk about the global until we're talking about the local. First, I want to talk about, and this is also resonate with what Ms. Moana was now mentioning, this framework. So with all the frameworks that we have, the different agendas, women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, disarmament agenda, the trade unions, and say like all these discussions that we have. And at the same time, when we're talking about this, it means that we are just being involved in too many things that we are forgetting about our main cause. And it's very important for us to move away from these silos, how we're able to move forward together in these different agendas to work towards a unified way of accomplishing or operationalizing this common security. There's no peace in Gaza, there's no security in Lebanon, there's no justice in Sudan, there's no future in our world. I'm mentioning just my region because maybe I think it's also important to discuss this particular region, given the extensive countries that are under war within this very small geographical region. When we want to have this kind of silencing, and we need to transform the narrative, we need to say, like, it's not a conflict. It's not even like women and children are not dying. They are being killed in their tents. They are being used, like all these weapons are being used upon them when they are still in their tents. Remember, they have been now for more than 1 year and a half under the cold, under during the summer, with the hunger being used as a weapon of war, with water being used as a weapon of war. Just imagine the tragedy that all these people are living through. Second point I want to mention, and like there's a pattern. That's why, like, I'm not going to go into many details, because I can see, like, now through the discussion that we had yesterday and today, there's a pattern of the things. So I'm just going to pinpoint things that impact us, and this is what calls for the global operationalization of this common security. And this is what we need, what we are calling for. And at the same time, this is why we need also the UN system to work. We need it to work. We have no other opportunity, and we no other platforms than the UN to work. We have this militarization versus the human security approach, and definitely we do not call for defense. Now we have, unfortunately, all this money, all this spending that is going to military. When we talk about the expenditure to military, then we're talking about destruction. More destruction means more money for humanitarian aid. More money to humanitarian aid means less money to development, means less money to the human security approach, means less money to the educational part, means less money to schools, to hospitals, to agriculture, to trades unions, to women, to equality, to women who are delivering their babies in unhealthy circumstances and unhealthy spaces. So just imagine, like, all of these processes that we're living in that are just building on elements of destruction. When you have this money that is being spent on militarization, you need to multiply it by I don't know how many times to imagine, like, the impact of its destruction on the earth, on the climate, on the soil, on the water. Just to mention one of the few things, like in Lebanon, most of the areas that were bombarded are thought to be the food basket of Lebanon. And these were bombarded with phosphorus weapons. These were bombarded with illegal weapons. You know what are these weapons? These are weapons that are tested weapons. They are testing these weapons on us, and then they sell it in the market. This is an economy. So the implications of the climate, and Lebanon had one, like the case against Israel in 2006, when the oil was bombarded and it affected the Mediterranean Sea. But still, up until this second, this General Assembly resolution is not implemented. This is one of the things that is being raised. What is needed now is more of, we have the climate, we have the militarization, but we need to move forward. And we need to move forward collectively. We need to think on how we are going to move forward. Mrs. Moena also mentioned the issue of funding, and we need to think of how we're going to reallocate these funds, how we're going to re-embed these women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, disarmament agenda, the artificial intelligence, the implications of all these weaponization systems into different platforms, so that we can have a meaningful engagement of those who are at the grassroots. In Lebanon, for example, this ceasefire agreement did not include any women and did not include any youth. And at the same time, the monitoring of the ceasefire does not include women. Do we expect to have different results if we're going to have the same input at the time, if women are not included in these different processes? If we, civil society from the South and the North, if we're not able to collaborate and have a proper platform to move forward, are we going to make a change? I don't think so. What we need is to reshape our vision of security. We need to act as a collective solidarity. And if you don't mind, I want to say, and this is something maybe for us to hear at this platform, especially during the war, and which is still perpetuating now in Gaza, we were very much hurt, not only by those countries that are sending weapons, but also from peace activists and from feminist organizations who did not have the proper solidarity that they should have had. We're trying to survive. And still, during our methods of surviving, we're acting for peace. But we're not having the proper solidarity that is needed. And that's why we need to rethink our solidarity campaigns, and we need to rethink how you're able to listen to the grassroots women and the grassroots youth organizations and what we are facing and what our messages. How you are able to stop these manufacturing weapons companies of not only of manufacturing these weapons, how to hold them complicit and accountable, and name and shame them for the death that we are living, and how at the same time we need to have our member states also accountable. How we're able to stop these weapons from reaching conflict areas in accordance to the Arms Trade Treaty 7.4. So this is a collective thing that we need to have, and this is a mutual accountability, not only from the South or women and men and youth, elderly, whoever, who are living in conflict areas, but it's also like your responsibility. Those in the north who are living like with the proper electricity, you have the proper water, you have your daily lives. It's not like us. You have a responsibility, and we have to act accordingly together on how we move from, if I might say, like as if as if our activism is blurred, how to make it more visible, and how we can make also the civil society accountable, how we're able to make those manufacturing weapons accountable, how we can raise our voices to decision makers to make the change. It needs to start from us. If we're always going to talk among ourselves, we're listening to ourselves among ourselves, what kind of impact do we expect? We need to change our approach, and we need to change our strategies, and we need to have a real in-depth discussion, each organization by itself, and come together to say, like, this is how we saw a change can happen. Why there are countries who are really supporting Palestine or Lebanon or asking for ceasefire. The last thing that I want to say, common security cannot be achieved if we have states who are vetoing ceasefire. Can you imagine vetoing ceasefire? It means like we're vetoing just killing of civilians. Women in Gaza did not ask for weapons. Women in Gaza and in Lebanon asked for ceasefire. Thank you.
Shireen, thank you so much for these clear and impressive words, for mentioning, but also mentioning the problems of solidarity with the people in Gaza and Lebanon. And I think you gave us a lot of homework for further thinking and for developing more actions for ceasefire and peace in the whole region. Thank you so much for this impressive lecture. And you can see in the chat that you get a lot of solidarity and support for your impressive words. Jeroen, the floor is to you.
Yes, thank you, Rainer. And also from me, thanks to Shireen. That was a good wake-up call for all of us to be more active, to organize stronger, better, and to make sure that our solidarity is real for all those claiming spaces in terms of peace negotiations and government policies that are being developed, to claim that space, and for policy officers to grant that space to people to shape their own future. Next up, we are very fortunate to be joined by Ambassador Jan Eliasson. He's one of Sweden's most respected diplomats, I think, a true global statesman. His very long career includes, I think most of you know, serving as Deputy Secretary General of the UN, and before that, Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's very renowned for his mediation work in some of the world's most intractable conflicts. So he will speak to the necessity and also the possibility of a just and peaceful international order built on diplomacy, human rights, and multilateralism that we all want to achieve. Mr. Eliasson, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Great to be with you. The words of Shirin rings still in my ears and remind me of the first three words of the UN Charter that I always carry with me. The first three words of the Charter is "we the peoples." It's not "we the governments." And if we forget to place the human being in the center of our activities, whether it is the work for peace or development or human rights and international law, then we have misunderstood what this is all about. We should be accountable to those who suffer. And I'm glad, Shirin, that you brought that subject so passionately to this discussion. I always also want to add a personal note of gratitude to you who have organized this meeting, the three organizers, because I was working for Olof Palme for 6 years. I was his assistant in the negotiations between Iran and Iraq in the 80s. And during that time and afterwards, he called me in as diplomatic advisor. So I served with him when he was prime minister. And I remember so much the passion with which he worked on this concept of common security. He was, of course, very strongly influenced by the European scene, the East-West confrontation, and the wall that existed at that time in Europe between East and West. But he also was, of course, very much involved in what was then called the Third World. And he felt very strongly about translating these ideas of common security to the global scene, whether it was Middle East or Africa or Asia. And I remember so many phone calls about this subject. One of the architects together with him was Egon Bahr, of course, the minister in Germany. And I think, even if it's perhaps a bit of self-praise in the Swedish connection, that it really was one of the bricks that were laid to create a different order during the Cold War, which then later led to the fall of the wall in 1989. But thank you very much for doing this, and also to the Palme Center, Oscar and his predecessors, Anna Sundström, Björn Lind, who revived the Common Security Report 40 years after its creation. And as some of you have said here, it's more topical and more relevant today than ever. I mean, we have moved in a horrible direction in the world of distrust, division, and polarization, not having communication, and stopping contacts as a peace factor. Diplomacy is in a very bad state of affairs. The efforts to find peaceful settlements are not given priority. It's mainly military victories. I hope you saw the quotation marks. And where we are completely forgetting that it is ending wars, which is our main, or not starting war, which is our main mission, and also creating fair and good conditions for the majority of humanity, and of course to maintain human rights. So again, thank you for bringing these issues up. I think that I will try to make an attempt to move in the direction of operationalizing the concept, because I don't think we need to go further into the horrors of today's world. We have the Ukraine war, we have the horror in the Middle East, and we have the Sudan war and so forth. And we have the steps backward on development and reduction of support of the United Nations. And we have a decay of international laws. I don't need to go into that, but I think I will ask myself what we can do about it. First, I will take a pretty unconventional approach to attitudes, or the sort of mental preparedness that we need to have in today's world. Because I think we are all depressed by the state of affairs and the development as they are, with the uncertainty and fear around the world, growing by the day almost today, these days. And that is that we should try to think in two perspectives. We should be extremely good in our analysis of the world as it is. And it's not a pretty place. And even if I'm an old-time UN man, I don't think we should have any rosy, idealistic pictures of the world as it is. It's a pretty bad place right now. And we should have a strong and clear, realistic analysis of the world. But we must never forget the world as it should be. We have to think in terms of two perspectives. We have to be good in dealing with the crisis today, realistic and action-oriented, but we also need to never forget the world as it should be. And it's no coincidence that I picked up the Charter, because the Charter, that's where it is, the principles, the norms that we need to revive and make sure that we place very high up. And what we now are faced with is the need, an urgent need, for the mobilization of good forces. For peace and development, human rights and international law, but also for solidarity, as Shirin pointed to, and putting the human being at the center. That movement is really extremely important to create, and I'm so glad that you picked the common security concept and the report in its version 1982 and revived in 2022 into this discussion, and that you succeeded, the three of you organizers, to bring so many actors from different levels into this discussion. Now, I was president of the General Assembly in 2005 and 6, and we had a summary of the whole agenda for the UN. It was Kofi Annan and myself who worked out with a group, a very simple sentence, which many of you know, but I repeat it because it really gives me the framework for what we need to do. We summarized this whole report, 170 paragraphs in the 2005 summit document. We summarized in this way: there is no peace without development. But there is no development without peace. And there is neither peace nor development without respect of human rights and respect of international law. So what we have is an agenda which is built on three pillars. And these three pillars have to be strong at the same time if we are to have stable societies. We need to make sure that we have peaceful societies. We also have to make sure that we have fairness and equity in economic and social conditions in our countries, and between us, of course, between rich and poor. And we need to have absolute 100% respect of all the basic documents that we and our predecessors in diplomacy have negotiated over the years. The UN Charter, the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions, the laws of the war, etc. All that which is now living a life in shadow. So let us remember these three principles, that we have to be active in all these three aspects: peace, development, and human rights at the same time. And this also sends a message to us in the name of common security. That is, that security has to be seen both in the context of peace, development, and human rights. Taking care of these three dimensions is a broadened and a comprehensive security concept, a realistic concept. You can't divorce the climate change issues from security. You can't divorce human rights from peace. They are all connected. And this means that we have to have a way of working which reflects this model of thinking, which means that you need to simply put the problem in the center. I worked in Swedish government and bureaucracy. I've lived in the UN bureaucracy. I just want to say that if we start to use as a method of change to put the problem in the center, it could be a human rights problem, it could be water in development, it could be prevention of a conflict in the peace sector. We should put the problem in the center and then unite around the table those who can influence that problem. And this means that we can, in today's world, we should not only work with ourselves in the international organizations as member states. That's, of course, basic. UN is built on that. But we need to also bring in parliaments. We need to bring in civil society. We need to bring in the media. We need to bring in the research in the university world. All other sectors and of course the business sector also. All these other sectors that have an interest in a world that lives in peace, development, and human rights. And this is a pretty unconventional way of working because we are so used to working in silos. But I will tell you, if we try this other method, putting the problem in the center and then gather around the problem and then come out with a division of labor, we are in much better shape. And then in order not for us to get deeply depressed about this situation in the world, remember the world as it should be at the same time. And I say also that there is a need now, of course, for a revival and renaissance of international law. We are seeing a complete disregard of international law in so many areas. The Russian aggression in Ukraine, the actions in the Middle East, both from Hamas and, of course, Israel, in the starvation and the replacement of people innumerous times that Shirin mentioned. And, of course, the very disregard of the norms of humanitarian law. I was the first emergency relief coordinator in the UN, and we were proud to try to live up to those principles, and they were known. But if you make a survey today, you will find out that the international law is not as known as it should be. Not even the humanitarian principles are well known. You need to revive those. Tom Fletcher, the new dynamic head of the OCHA, is speaking more and more dramatically about this lack of respect of respect for human law, particularly after his experiences in Gaza recently. But I also think that we need to revive the work of the United Nations. I know there is now a situation where UN is put in the shadow and blamed, but my God, what is absolutely crucial now is to realize that this is the only organization we have that covers these three subjects and has a universal participation. So whatever we say about the results, we need to revive this organization and make sure it works. Olof Palme, whom I worked with, as you know, for 6 years, he was growingly interested in international law. He learned it. He was almost like a professor of international law at the end before he killed. And he always said to me, Jan, remember one thing. The respect of international law is the first line of defense for a small and medium-sized nation. It's the first line of defense. If we have a solid trust in international law, a solid attachment to international law, we actually are creating a first line of defense. That's what it's all about. And that's why it's so important that we revive the UN. Of course, with the veto power, that is difficult, but I think we will have to see the urgent need for a reduction of the use of the veto in some situations. For instance, when cases of genocide are around the corner, or war crimes, etc., that were in the ICC documents. But we need also to make sure that we work in such a way that the international law is becoming the leading principle for the work in the Security Council. I think it also will have to lead to representation from Latin America, Africa, and Pacific Asia. We can continue this way. I remember how difficult it was when I was President of the Assembly to bring about change. But this time I have a feeling that the legitimacy of the UN needs a really serious discussion. But right now we live with a big fear. When I recalled Olof Palme's quote about the international law being the first line of defense, I think about the risk in today's world that the major powers, and let's speak very clearly, United States, China, and Russia, will more and more think in terms of spheres of interest, where they will look for what their interests from a strictly national perspective, politically, economically, etc. And then with the right of the might, as they say, also take the steps to make these interests a reality. We see that now in situations that are obvious, both in Ukraine and on certain parts of the world that are in the interest of the United States, land grabs, more or less. And we see it also around Asia and China. So what I think we need now is to come back to Olof Palme's report, the common security, to make sure that we have both a movement in the direction of the whole concept of realizing that you need to build security and cooperation, but also that you need to bring out more of interdependence as a peace factor, and revive diplomacy as a means of solving problems before they turn into these horrors that we have today. My favorite article in this UN Charter is Article 33, which talks about all the things that we should do before a conflict erupts. And I can just mention what we should do before conflicts. We should go for negotiations, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, or peaceful means, other peace of their own choice. How much of this are we doing? We need to make sure that we live up to that we revive diplomacy, also as part of the common security concepts, and by that we contribute to a more broadened security thinking in today's world, with the support of major actors in the world, not only governments and international organizations, but also broad popular movements. And I am very grateful that you have organized this conference in this spirit, and I think you can make a difference. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And this is what we should realize in these pretty difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this was very enlightening and very interesting listening to you after somebody who's currently in the UN Secretary General's office and who spoke about the possibilities and the opportunities for new balances in the system. Listening to Shireen, who then spoke how the system has failed, and then listening to you, while defending the UN system and the UN Charter, also pinpointing at some weaknesses, needs for reform with representation and veto rights. There were some comments in the chat as well of people who really see that the system needs to be reformed to deliver for what it's intended to do. And I think the slogan behind us also says, for democracy that delivers, that people really want to see that that governments and institutions really deliver on their human rights and their decency to live. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. For me, it was again lessons I learned, like the same lessons when we were working together to develop the Common Security Report in 2022. And I can only say it is great to listen to you, because you are one of these important people which are still staying for common security. And this is, I think, a hope that we can promote common security in a much broader way than in the last years. So thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to announce the next speaker, who is coming from Colombia. He's the president of the Central Union of Workers. It is the biggest trade union in Colombia, and I think you all know how difficult and dangerous is the work of the common security in this country. So, Fabio Arias, you are heavily welcome to join our meeting, and we are waiting with great respect to your words related to common security. Your topic is building trust and solidarity, de-escalation conflicts. Fabio, the floor is to you.
Buenos días, aquí en Colombia. Saludos para todas las personas que en este momento están conectados a este evento. Agradecimientos a la Confederación Sindical Internacional por esta invitación y obviamente quiero compartir con ustedes lo que nos está pasando en este momento acá en Colombia sobre un tema pues trascendental en la vida del planeta y especialmente para nosotros aquí en Colombia, como es el tema de lo que este gobierno ha denominado la paz total. Colombia pues ha tenido una larga historia de violencia política y obviamente armada, que ha determinado serias restricciones para la actividad sindical en nuestro país. Para todas las personas que están acá, tenemos una larga trayectoria de más de 60 años de conflicto armado en Colombia. Y en medio de ese conflicto, en los últimos 45 años, producto de ese conflicto armado, han asesinado a más de 3.500 dirigentes y activistas sindicales. Es lo que hemos llamado nosotros desde la Central Unitaria de Trabajadores el genocidio al sindicalismo, que derivado exactamente del acuerdo de paz, un acuerdo de paz muy importante en nuestro país, en el año 2016, permitió que se establecieran dos mecanismos de transición muy importantes para la vida política del país. El uno llamado la Comisión de Esclarecimiento de la Verdad, donde hay un capítulo específico donde se narra toda esta violencia y toda esta situación contra el sindicalismo, todo este genocidio, y otro que se llama la Justicia Especial de Paz, en el cual uno de los macrocasos de 8 que hay está relacionado con la violencia contra dirigentes y activistas sindicales. De tal manera que lo que quiero aquí decir es que ese es el episodio más importante realmente de todo este proceso de paz en Colombia, lo que se llamó la paz entre el gobierno en aquella época de Juan Manuel Santos, que posteriormente le dieron el premio de paz, premio Nobel de Paz, y la guerrilla de las FARC, la guerrilla tal vez más histórica y de mayor extensión que ha tenido en Colombia y que obviamente estuvo vinculado a todo este conflicto armado. Esa política de paz fue muy importante y muy significativa para el país. Digamos que intervino de manera positiva en la situación del desenvolvimiento democrático de la vida del país. Desafortunadamente, el gobierno de Iván Duque hizo todo lo posible por hacer trizas esos acuerdos de paz, cuestión que motivó un gran conflicto social en Colombia que se llamó el estallido social en el año 2021, producto inclusive también de la pandemia, y que permitió el proceso de paz y este estallido social del año 2021 la posibilidad de tener por primera vez en Colombia, en toda la vida republicana nuestra, un gobierno democrático, progresista, popular, con una fuerte tradición de izquierda, que es el que hoy está presidido por el presidente Gustavo Petro. El presidente Gustavo Petro se ha comprometido con ese proceso de paz, especialmente para retomar el acuerdo de paz firmado con las FARC para que se cumpla. Es decir, después de que el presidente Duque hizo todo el esfuerzo para hacerlo trizas, tocó restablecerlo y casi que pues reiniciarlo. Y en este momento pues hay avances en ese sentido importantes de cumplimiento del acuerdo de paz. Entonces el primer asunto de este gobierno en el tema de la paz fue restablecer definitivamente ese acuerdo de paz maltrecho en el gobierno de Iván Duque. Pero adicionalmente se propuso un plan bastante ambicioso, audaz si se quiere, y lo llamó la paz total, que era restableciendo el proceso de paz entre el gobierno y las FARC, para que eso se implementara definitivamente. El primer punto y más importante de él es el tema de la reforma agraria, de entregar unas tierras, más de 3 millones de hectáreas, a los campesinos que la cultivan y obviamente la hacen rentable y productora especialmente de alimentos. Y segundo, un proceso de paz con las guerrillas que todavía están en Colombia. Una de las disidencias de las FARC, desafortunadamente, un grupo disidente de las FARC prefirió volver al camino que estaba en las FARC. Eso se dividió en 3 procesos. Con 2 procesos de esos, el gobierno sostiene en este momento conversaciones para restablecer con ellos un proceso de paz. Pero el otro proceso, tal vez el más ambicioso, era con el ELN. Se estuvo trabajando durante 2 largos años con ellos. Se hizo por primera vez con ese grupo guerrillero un proceso de cese al fuego, pero desafortunadamente, a finales del año pasado, todo ese proceso se quebrantó y desafortunadamente no se ha podido avanzar en ese sentido. Todo parece indicar que con este grupo de opciones tierno, pero el gobierno ha sido muy crítico en este momento con la guerrilla del ELN, sosteniendo que prácticamente ha abandonado los criterios y los principios con los cuales habían tomado las armas y son hoy funcionales, según el mismo gobierno, a los procesos, desafortunadamente, de narcotráfico en nuestro país, que es, sin lugar a dudas, el combustible para la desafortunada situación de violencia que hoy vive en Colombia, puesto que, si bien es cierto, se han restablecido estos procesos, repito, con las FARC y con uno de las disidencias. En la semana pasada el gobierno hizo un acuerdo con uno de los sectores del ELN, el sector que en Colombia tiene o tenía algún un poder territorial, un sector del ELN llamado los comuneros, que definitivamente hizo el acuerdo de paz con el gobierno. Fue obviamente cuestionado y rechazado por parte del ELN, pero al fin y al cabo ese sector que tenía poder territorial, repito, en Nariño y Putumayo, rogó hacer un acuerdo con el gobierno. Y el gobierno intenta mantener o hacer la posibilidad de hacer un acuerdo con un grupo criminal muy importante en Colombia que se llama el Clan del Golfo, que tiene un poder territorial muy importante en los sectores de Antioquia y el Caribe colombiano, en la costa norte de Colombia. Allá tiene un poder muy grande que se extiende desde Antioquia hasta terminar con la frontera con Venezuela. Y ese es un sector bastante extendido en el país. El proceso de paz, desafortunadamente, repito, especialmente con la guerrilla del ELN, no se pudo adelantar, no se pudo desarrollar, no va a haber acuerdo con ellos en esta oportunidad. Y bueno, el gobierno persistirá con las 2 disidencias de las FARC y tratará de avanzar en ese sentido. Pero repito, el problema mayor que seguimos teniendo es el tema del narcotráfico y el paramilitarismo, que también está íntimamente ligado a ellos, que también hace parte de ese combustible que tiene el narcotráfico para seguir insistiendo con el poder del paramilitarismo en Colombia. La situación está así, no pareciese que se vaya a poder avanzar mucho en este sentido, desafortunadamente, y por eso el gobierno de Gustavo Petro no ha dudado un minuto en calificar de que la política antidrogas en Colombia, impulsada por los Estados Unidos, es una política fracasada que debe rectificar. Para terminar, debo decir que la Central Unitaria de Trabajadores es una convencida de persistir en que los sectores en conflicto, en esta oportunidad, el conflicto armado en Colombia, hagan procesos y hagan esfuerzos y aprovechen esta oportunidad que este gobierno permite para que definitivamente haya un proceso político negociado con estas estructuras armadas e inclusive las estructuras criminales vinculadas al narcotráfico. Persistiremos en nuestro afán de que debe haber solución política negociada al conflicto armado en nuestro país. Somos convencidos de que eso es lo mejor que le puede pasar al país. En este sentido también hemos sostenido una y otra vez el rechazo al genocidio de Israel contra el pueblo palestino en Gaza, y también persistimos en que en la guerra Rusia-Ucrania debe haber una solución política negociada también. Debe prevalecer por encima de todo una situación de solución política, y por tal motivo pues no estamos de acuerdo y rechazamos todos los procesos que dicen de escalar la posición militar en esta situación de guerra en Rusia y Ucrania, de Rusia y Ucrania. Este es nuestro mensaje general sobre el tema de la paz, no solamente en Colombia, sino en el mundo, y persistiremos que debe estarse es en una política de paz y no de guerra. Reiteramos nuestro compromiso con la vida y nuestro rechazo total a toda política de muerte. Muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad y un cordial saludo para todas y todos, y muy amable a la CEST por la invitación.
Thank you so much, Fabio Aria. That was really a brilliant presentation showing the development of peace and how to solve a conflict which destroyed the country for many, many years, and how are the problems by solving such a conflict. And thank you also to put these national conflict together with the big international problems like Gaza and the Ukrainian war, and shows to us the activities of your government. I think it was very helpful to understand what security means concrete in solving also a national conflict in a country, and how the international activities influence such a conflict, and also how difficult it is to solve. I think we have some minutes time for one or two questions to you. May Jérôme, you will ask the first question to Fabio, and then please, when you have a question, put it in the chat, when we will inform Fabio about the question, and maybe he can answer the question. Fabio, my question would be, how do you see the future in solving the problem with ELN, and how you see the future of the process of peace and development in your country? Because I think we learned from Jan that these two questions are deeply connected. Maybe you can say some words of the link between development and peace in your country.
Bueno, la posibilidad de la paz en Colombia, o el desarrollo de ella, está de alguna manera en un punto muy complejo, muy difícil. Las posibilidades de éxito de los procesos de conversación que el gobierno mantiene abiertas, pero que no se ha podido consolidar con el ELN, no parecen tener un buen futuro, especialmente porque entramos ya en un proceso electoral del próximo año. A principios del próximo año se desarrollará la elección de los congresistas en Colombia, y adicionalmente de la elección del nuevo presidente de la República. Y dada la situación de polarización política que existe en nuestro país, especialmente por la posición de oposición irracional de lo que nosotros llamamos acá el uribismo y el establecimiento neoliberal, pues van a colmar toda la agenda de aquí en adelante. E incluso este es un tema que definitivamente es aprovechado para las posiciones de mayores de extrema derecha del país, de las que representa el uribismo, de lo que representa el expresidente Álvaro Uribe Vélez. Y por eso, y en esa circunstancia, ellos entonces aprovechan de alguna manera que no hayan podido avanzar estos procesos, especialmente con el ELN, para decir que hay que recuperar y volver a lo que en su momento estuvo el presidente Álvaro Uribe Vélez diciendo de la seguridad democrática. La seguridad democrática es la expresión, digamos, de más extrema derecha en nuestro país, que es el recorte de los derechos democráticos, la persecución y la estigmatización, y en este sentido puedo decirlo con toda la precisión, la persecución y la estigmatización del sindicalismo. Si hubo algún periodo bastante complejo para el sindicalismo en Colombia, fue en el momento del año 2002 al año 2010, 8 años del gobierno de Álvaro Uribe Vélez, donde verdaderamente se nos estigmatizó, siempre se nos señaló de guerrilleros y siempre se justificaron los asesinatos contra dirigentes políticos, pero también contra el sindicalismo. Fue la época de mayor persecución, de mayor estigmatización y de mayor cantidad de asesinatos para el movimiento sindical. De tal manera que esta problemática electoral que se nos viene está íntimamente ligado a si se recupera por parte del uribismo y de la extrema derecha el gobierno y por tal motivo la persecución y la estigmatización, o por el contrario logramos tener la continuidad de un gobierno democrático, progresista y popular como el de Gustavo Petro, que permite sin lugar a dudas mayores garantías a la expresión democrática y sin lugar a dudas la posibilidad de que estos grupos armados entiendan perfectamente la oportunidad que siempre se les ha ofrecido desde una perspectiva democrática y popular como son estos gobiernos que hoy tenemos. Yo lo analizaría y lo definiría de esa manera.
Thank you, and I think, Jérôme, I will give the floor back to you.
Yeah, with just one final question, I think, for Fabio, which was also the question that I had on my mind. So thank you very much for your intervention. What I also noticed is that you did not make any references. That you did not make many references to the international community. You did not refer often to the United Nations, regional structures potentially, or the international community. Are there any final thoughts that you have in terms of the role for the UN or international solidarity?
No, por supuesto que sí. Disculpe no haberlo mencionado y a pesar de que usted me lo insinuó. Ya lo recuperé. El punto es este. Evidentemente, el proceso de paz con las FARC siempre tuvo un acompañamiento internacional muy positivo y todavía lo mantiene a través de las Naciones Unidas. Aquí hay así como se dice, un comisionado especial de Naciones Unidas que evidentemente ha estado pendiente todo el tiempo y ha contribuido no solamente con su presencia, sino con diversas manifestaciones y expresiones de las Naciones Unidas para el proceso de paz con las FARC, y ha contribuido de alguna manera también a que se propicien algunos acercamientos con otros grupos y actores armados en el país. Pero repito, esa es una actividad muy importante, muy significativa. Fue muy crítico cuando Duque estuvo haciendo o tratando de hacer trizas los acuerdos de paz, llamando al gobierno nacional a que atendiera ese reclamo y esa solicitud de la comunidad internacional. Y debo decir que en estos términos de la solidaridad internacional, Europa ha sido también muy diligente y muy eficaz en mantener una opinión favorable a todo proceso de paz. Y quiero aquí decir, y de antemano, toda la solidaridad recibida por el movimiento sindical. No hablo ahora de estos últimos momentos, hablo de siempre. Cuando aquí se recrudeció la estigmatización, la persecución y los asesinatos a dirigentes y líderes sindicales, especialmente en la época de Álvaro Uribe Vélez, debemos decir exactamente que el sindicalismo internacional, tanto de América Latina, pero especialmente de Europa, dijo presente, solidario, e hicimos varias intervenciones de ellos en algunas actividades, no solamente en Europa, sino aquí en Colombia, donde el movimiento sindical internacional se hizo presente y ayudó especialmente al sindicalismo a poder mantener en alto la bandera de los derechos de los trabajadores, pero adicionalmente de reclamar de manera significativa la conveniencia y la necesidad de que en Colombia se parara ese genocidio al sindicalismo y se restablecieran sin lugar a dudas procesos de paz que al final tuvieron un resultado positivo con el de las FARC especialmente, pero que hay todavía terreno por hacer, y en ese sentido la solidaridad debe ser también un elemento que se debe mantener, y especialmente la presión y la presencia de Naciones Unidas aquí en Colombia. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Fabio. And I think we all wish you all the very best and a lot of strength and courage in difficult circumstances to build peace. So thanks a lot. And then to round out the panel, we're very delighted to have Ambassador Annika Söder with us as well. Annika is the chair of the European Institute of Peace and has served also in top roles in Swedish foreign affairs, as well as in the UN and the OSCE, which has been referenced as well. And with her commitment to preventive diplomacy and multilateral cooperation, Annika will conclude the panel by examining how global institutions and partnerships can play a more effective role in resolving regional crises and building lasting peace. Annika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very, very much. So the question is, are there global efforts to actually improve the situation or not? And I would like to mention the spaces that are shrinking for civil society, and also obviously for trade unions and other social movements. The places are weakened. We've spoken today a lot about the United Nations, and it's obvious that many actors would want to dilute the role of the UN, and they have so far been rather successful. But there are also the faces. Who do we actually see online, on television, in the media? And I fear that we have some role models now that we would really like to replace with other actors. And that is why, of course, working together to identify common security prospects. That is why that is so important. Diplomacy and negotiations have been at the forefront for us, more privileged in what we used to call the West. We have seen it as the first line of defense. To talk to the adversary, as was mentioned earlier by Philip Jennings, has been a guiding star for many of us. And I believe that possibly the peace agreement, wide, comprehensive, and deep in Colombia, was the last peace agreement we actually had with prospects for long-term success. Since then, we've seen this dilution of international cooperation, possibly with the first term of President Trump, and with the growing authoritarianism in many of our countries. So the question is, those of us who worked for and used diplomatic means, dialogue, negotiations, international law, rule of law, were we wrong when the result is now proxy wars in many parts of the world, President Putin and President Trump being more deal makers than actually interested in peace? And if we were wrong, is there another way to deal with this? Should we come up with a more up-to-date model for a peace order to be initiated, and who can actually do this? I believe we have to look at the root causes, and we have to strengthen what we want to defend. This is local, national, regional, and global. It's about welfare. It's about dealing with inequalities, justice, economic and social rights, and freedoms. And then bringing this up to higher and higher levels, because we know that right-wing extremism, populism thrive on the perception that you're not treated equally, that you are not gaining from the prosperity that others may have. And with the present situation, with the trade war, trade being weaponized in a way we've never seen before, there are risks that governments will move into isolation, narrow national interests will govern, and that the interest in the people's well-being will be even less. So I believe we also have to unpack the we that we use in these conversations, and I will come back to that. So looking at the Commission of Common Security of the 80s, we can see the guiding stars. We need to talk to the enemy. We have to have a security approach that gives security to everyone. We need to work on mutual disarmament. We have to respect the international order and international law and the UN Charter. All these ideals have waned over the last 10 years, maybe even earlier. And in addition to those challenges, we have the climate, the underused role of women, the rights of human rights in general, but also trade union and workers' rights. We have still the nuclear threat. And let me say a couple of words about that. The rhetoric on nuclear arms in Europe is very, very worrying. It's worrying because we also have other actors looking at the possibility of nuclear armament. As we all know, we have Pakistan, India, and Israel having the possession of nuclear arms without being recognized as having them and without being members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We know about North Korea, and I was personally involved in trying to find a solution to North Korea about 10 years ago. That did not succeed. We also know about Iran, and Philip Jennings mentioned earlier today the prospects of negotiations between Iran and the United States. I believe this is a very, very important step if it can happen, since if Iran will acquire nuclear arms, there is a huge risk that other neighbors than the ones I already mentioned will also try to acquire nuclear arms, and we will have a nuclear arms race never seen before. Another aspect that we not talked that much about, but I know is close to the hearts of social movements and trade unionists, is of course the role of globalization, the pros and cons of globalization, and the fact that it has been guided by a neoliberal economic approach for many, many years, creating this perception of not being involved. Turning to a couple of important factors in the work that the European Institute of Peace is doing, I wanted to mention the work we're doing between Iran and the Arab Gulf countries, where talking to the enemy actually plays in a very positive way, so that Saudi Arabia, taking the lead, is actually in constant dialogue with Iran, which has been seen as the main enemy for many, many years. So we should also look at places where efforts are being made to find common security solutions. I'm fully aware of the domestic situation in the countries we're talking about, but still, geopolitically, it can play a very important role if there is an agreement among those countries. The European Institute of Peace is also working on Palestine and Israel, And there we dedicate most of our efforts to supporting the Palestinian agency. The situation is devastating, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. The resistance against occupation by most is conducted in a non-violent way. But I believe the world has failed when it comes to solidarity to the Palestinian cause, and failed when it comes to recognizing Palestine as an independent state. What is positive here, and again, in a way, about common security, is that there is a global alliance of about 100 nations working for the implementation of a two-state solution. I regret that this is not really well known, but if some demands were put on this alliance of about 100 countries, including all EU countries and all OIC and Arab League countries, it could actually play a role to counter those who believe that violence could lead to a solution, since I believe that continued violence could actually lead to Palestinians being in a situation where they will lose their country. So there are regional solutions, and I mentioned a few that have prospects but are underused and underestimated. Let me also mention the role of women. And as some of you may know, when the Social Democrats were in government in Sweden, we launched the feminist foreign policy. Many countries followed us, and we uphold the 3 R's: rights, representation, and resources. And about 14, 15 countries believe in and have launched variations of a feminist foreign policy. It is my hope that those 15 countries will take more action when it comes to the situation of women. We heard Shirin explain what's actually going on in Lebanon and in Palestine. There are many, many other situations where governments can step up and give support. Unfortunately, the present conservative government in Sweden, they abolished this policy, so Sweden is no longer a member. I hope that the elections in Sweden next year will change this. There was also the Global Deal initiative that we took about 10 years ago to actually have a global drive for decent work and for workers' rights. And I believe that initiative that was then seated in the OECD, that can also be revived and claim the important rights. Finally, I was in a commission on the principles for peace, and I wanted to mention those principles as guiding stars for peace, but also guiding stars for us to work in solidarity together. It's about the legitimacy and accountable security for people in war situations or in peace processes or in authoritarian regimes. It's about solidarity and dignity and humility when we interact with people in difficult situations. It's also about promoting a pluralist approach, local approaches, and also to understand that every situation is separate from the other. This could be a way to overcome a trust crisis if implemented, and if we succeed in convincing governments to actually apply those principles. I think we're far away from that right now. When it comes to unpacking the we, I believe that we need to look at the root causes for right-wing extremism, for populism, and again, I repeat, find the solutions to overcome inequalities and to support human rights. To me, this is deeply ideological in the sense that when we listen to Fabio and what he says about Colombia, it's quite clear that with the leadership, an elected leadership, having the ideology of common security, having the ideology of actually caring for the people in their country, you will also see a movement, be it on women's rights, be it on trade unions, be it on climate, be it on disarmament and avoiding militarization. It has been mentioned that small states could play a role. I believe that there is a group of middle powers around the world with governments who could actually join forces and work together if pressure is strong enough from their people, from civil society, and from other actors. I believe many of them are to be found in the European Union, and it is my hope that the European Union will not move in the same direction as other global powers have been doing lately. Finally, at the global scene, I believe we really need to initiate what can be called a North-South dialogue with the inequalities between different kinds of countries, between what we used to call the West and the rest. I believe we need to find ways, using all the channels we have, to actually work closer together in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anneke. I think this was excellent as well, to have a bit more of a European perspective, realizing that it's one of those regions that is repositioning itself in the midst of all those geopolitical shifts. If we have 2 minutes more, I think we have a question from the floor that is referring to the impact of globalization, or the current model of globalization, and how it plays a part in creating the imbalances, the instability that we see around the world today. So if you could expand a little bit more or reflect on it as well. And then I also had a question, since it was brought up at the beginning of the conference but hasn't featured since. It's the role of the OSCE, or the potential role of the OSCE, and whether you had any thoughts on it.
Thank you. So let me start with the OSCE. The OSCE is in a way a brainchild of common security, since it encompasses former enemies and took off after the fall of the wall and the fall of the Soviet Union with the Paris Charter in 1990, encompassing security in the more conventional sense, but also economy and the environment and the human dimension, meaning democracy and human rights. My fear today is that the fact that President Putin has given up on all the principles embedded in the OSCE and in the UN Charter, and cannot be trusted when it comes to, possibly after a ceasefire agreement or a peace agreement for Ukraine, that the trust in this construct of OSCE is diminishing. Many Europeans in the European Union, for example, believe that we will have a Cold War with Russia for generations to come. So there's presently very little effort to try to come back to the arms control instruments and the other confidence building instruments embedded in the OSCE. I believe this is detrimental if we do not try in the context of a peace agreement, and also to think of countries that want to be part of a multilateral structure, like the Central Asian countries, that will be left without a belonging to a multilateral structure at the regional level. The UN is, of course, still there. So it is at the crossroads. It has a transatlantic link. But the question is also now what will happen with the US relationship with the OSCE, which has always been a very strong one. But now the OSCE transatlantic link may be with Canada only. We do not know yet, but it's a very, very important question, also bearing in mind all the protracted and frozen conflicts in the OSCE region, be it the Western Balkans or other parts of Eastern Europe. When it comes to globalization, I believe we've all lived with, and not least all of you trade unionists, with the global value chains for a very long time. We've got used to it. We have not accepted, but we've seen also how different working conditions play in the global market. And since it has been driven with a more with a true market economy approach, with a neoliberal approach, it has not really been able to cater for rights and equalities that should have been embedded in the global economy. Now, what I tried to allude to before is that President Trump has his own view on how to get rid of globalization, but I do not see that as taking prosperity and welfare and equality any way forward. Rather, the country, including when it comes to his own electorate, that may also suffer from the way he is now handling globalization.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're past time. Maybe if you could be very brief, Kjeld, I can give you the floor for a minute to say something. You're muted. Okay, I think this is not working. Okay, so then apologies for the final technical glitch, but thank you very much for Annika for her intervention, and for all of those listening. This is all we have time for. I want to also thank my co-facilitator, Reiner. He's back on the screen, that's good. Because I think we will have to wrap up. I think we've done a serious round with excellent speakers, with a lot of inputs in terms of how changes could be made to the global system, how action could be taken at local levels for us to follow up on. Reiner, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, no, I think we will continue our discussion in the afternoon in the different sessions and in the final plenary. I think a lot of really brilliant thoughts and ideas were mentioned, and I think we have to continue working with it. I can only say to all the speakers, thank you so much for your big support and big help by developing this conference. I think it was a great spirit in this discussion, and I hope that we can work with the positive results we see now and can develop common security in a much broader sense than we have done in the last years. And now we have a break, I think, for 10 minutes.
Exactly. So enjoy a break, everyone. Stay connected, and we reconvene to have a full discussion with more room to speak for all.
Yes.
Welcome back, everybody. Emilia, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello.
Yeah, should we start? I guess so. We are perfectly on time.
Yeah. I think we've lost a few people on the road, but it's okay.
Yeah, they might join still. Well, then welcome back. Thank you for still being here with us. It has been a very interesting session, and I hope you had a lot of food for thoughts. I sure did. And I also hope you still have some energy, because now we are entering in the more interactive session part of the conference. And I would say also one of the most important ones, because it's our aim is really to collect ideas now from the audience, from practitioners, from activists, from all the fora we were able to gather here today with us. Maybe just to start with a couple of rules, since as said, it's gonna be an interactive session. Please, again, be polite with all your comments and feedback. We can disagree. We are here for discussion, but please always be polite and peaceful with your comments. And also, if possible, try to stay short, maximum 2-3 minutes. So everyone can have the possibility to interact with the other participants. Also, you can also give some statements if you wish so, or also questions. Some of the speakers, the brilliant panel we had until now, is still here with us today. Not all of them, but if you also had still some questions from the previous session, you can still use this time to ask your question directly to the speaker. Yeah, I think yes, and most importantly, please be action-oriented, because as mentioned many times, we are aware analysis is important. We need to be aware of the facts and the situation in the different regions, but the aim of this conference is really to be action-oriented and future-oriented. So try to stay, where possible, positive, and really think of possible concrete solutions we can achieve within the framework, obviously, of common security. So keep that in mind. I don't know, Daniela, if you want me to start already with introducing the general question, and or you can also go if you wish. Should I keep going? Great. Yeah, I will co-moderating this session with my dear colleague, Danielle. So the general question we wanted to kick off the conversation is, again, how can we collectively campaign and advocate for a concrete redefinition of security that it's a way of this militarized and state-centric definition that we are all very familiar with? How can we really change this framework from the militarization to a more common security and collective approach in order to retake back the definition of security? And again, what are the immediate steps that we as civil society, as activists, as trade unionists can take in order to achieve this new redefinition of security? This is the stand where we want to start. Again, it's an open forum, so feel free to address also the organizers and the speakers. And maybe I can start. We have already a couple of people that would like to have some introductory remarks. Therefore, I would like to introduce, maybe we start with Manal, if she's ready. Manal Taha, she's a Sudanese anthropologist and conflict analysis expert. And I believe she will explain a little bit more also the situation, obviously, in Sudan, but then in general also keep this global perspective. So please, Manal, if you are ready.
Hi, everybody. My name is Manal Taha. I'm originally from Sudan. I live here in Washington, D.C. Let me start from what is the current status of the war now in Sudan. So we have we have a war between two parties. The national, the Sudan military, the national military, and a paramilitary called Rapid Support Forces, RSF. And the Sudan army is called SAF, which is Sudan Army Forces. So I'm going to refer to SAF and RSF. RSF is a paramilitary, but is no longer part of the military, and now they give her the name of militia, because it doesn't have judiciaries to be part of the national army. However, they are well equipped, very strong. Their head of it, Hemeti, used to be part of the government. He's the second man, and the first man was the head of the army. So those two guys were partners. One is the president, one is the deputy, and they were sharing their interest and exporting the gold of Sudan and controlling 82% of the Sudan treasury. The war started between the two of them because there was a competition on the resources that we have in Sudan, especially the gold resources. Sudan number 4 in gold in Africa and number 9 in the world. So this is number 1. Number 2, the other minerals we have, and also the other resources we have. So this is like a war on resources on Sudan, and the direct impact was citizens. So there was no an actual ethics or moral in their attack and in their combat. So the victims are the citizens, because there is no anybody to hold them accountable if they kill people. The various victims are women. RSF used to control, which is the militia, used to control Khartoum, control central Sudan, control many areas, like 70% of Sudan. And they advanced their military operations in many areas. They use drones, they use support from outside, they recruit people from different places. SAF, which is the national army, also they got support from different countries, Egypt, Saudi, they buy from China, Iran, RSF from Chad, from Emirates, from Russia. So it's international war in a local land. So that's what I can say it and describe it. And it's local, and we, as a citizen, we perceive it a war against citizens, against Sudanese, because there is a lot of looting, a lot of rape, a lot of killing, and arbitrary arrest, and all that's happening on for civilians. We have like 11 million displaced internally and 2 million refugees outside the country. That's the number we know them. There's many numbers we don't know them in different countries. So this is one of the things that makes Sudan like this crisis is severe. In addition of that, we have the starvation, and that's never happened in our lifetimes. So this is starvations. It's to the extent that you cannot find a meal for 1 or 2 or 3 days. You walk like a long distance, miles and days without food, because you are running for your life and you don't have food, The access, Sudan, yesterday I was with the Arab Center in one of the also webinar like that, and I was talking about the neglection of the war itself. The war in Sudan is being neglected because there is no long commitment to resolve this problem. When I say long-term commitment, is the international interference, when they come, they do quick fix deal, a peace deal that it doesn't really touch the root causes of the problem. It doesn't talk about development. It doesn't talk about health or education. So hold on. I can see. Oh, sorry. They want me to keep it short. So that's the situation we have it in Sudan. Yesterday, we have a very important milestone in the ICC in Hague. Sudan has a case primarily against UAE because they accusing of supporting RSF, the militia, and violating the arm embargo in Darfur. So that's the most important development. And thank you. Down the road, we can talk more about if you have any questions.
Thank you, Manal. We have two more persons that will just kick off the discussion. The idea, just to remind you, is also to, if you can also focus on the question, so how can we work collectively to redefine, but of course, from your perspective and your context. So thank you very much, Manal, for giving us a little bit of the context in Sudan. I invite Hania Bitar from PLR in Palestine, who can give us some insights about the situation there and for women peace activists. Is she with us or no?
I'm having problems locating her. I don't think she's here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then let's start. Let's continue with Hervé.
Yeah.
Kambinyam Salambote, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the Democratic Confederation of Labor in DRC. I look forward to listening to you, especially on your perspectives on the role of the youth also in peace building.
Bonjour, chers camarades. C'est avec honneur et responsabilité que je prends la parole aujourd'hui pour souligner un enjeu fondamental pour notre présent comme notre avenir. Le rôle des jeunes dans le processus de paix et dans les mouvements syndicaux en République démocratique du Congo et dans le monde. La jeunesse souvent reléguée à la périphérie des décisions est pourtant le cœur battant de nos sociétés. Elle incarne l'énergie et l'innovation et la résilience. Et surtout, elle porte une vision, celle d'un monde plus juste, plus équitable, plus pacifique. Dans un pays comme le nôtre, traversé par les conflits armés, entre autres à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo, par l'AFC/M23 soutenu par le Rwanda, à l'ouest par les milices Mugondo, et au sud-ouest par les Bakatakatanga, les inégaux jeunes refusent d'être spectateurs. Ils veulent et doivent être acteurs du changement. Et cela passe par leurs engagements dans le mouvement de paix, mais aussi et surtout dans les mouvements syndicaux. Pourquoi? Parce que le syndicalisme, lorsqu'il est authentique et combatif, est une force de transformation sociale. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de défendre les droits des travailleurs, mais aussi de préserver la dignité humaine, de lutter contre les injustices structurelles qui alimentent le conflit, de promouvoir la solidarité au-delà des appartenances. Les jeunes syndicalistes congolais se battent pour un emploi digne, pour la justice sociale, pour l'égalité des chances. Ils utilisent les outils numériques pour mobiliser, dénoncer et éduquer. Ils sont présents dans les quartiers, dans les universités, dans les mines, dans les champs, partout où la voix des travailleurs a besoin de se faire entendre. Mais soyons clairs, leur potentiel reste sous-exploité. Trop souvent, les jeunes sont vus comme inexpérimentés, brillants, voire gênants. Nous devons changer cela. Nous devons ouvrir les portes de nos syndicats, les former, les écouter, les confier des responsabilités. La paix ne se construira pas sans justice sociale. Et la justice sociale ne se réalisera pas sans la jeunesse. Mes recommandations sont simples mais urgentes. Intégrons systématiquement les jeunes dans les instances syndicales, pas seulement comme adhérents, mais comme leaders, formateurs et négociateurs. Créons des espaces communs entre le mouvement de paix et les syndicats pour construire des stratégies conjointes de sécurité humaine, centré sur les droits, la dignité et la solidarité. Investissons dans la formation des jeunes, à médiation, dialogue social et plaidoyer pour qu'ils deviennent des architectes solides de la paix dans leur communauté. Enfin, mettons en place des plateformes régionales et internationales où des jeunes activistes peuvent collaborer et partager leurs initiatives et amplifier leur voix pour une sécurité commune en RDC, en Afrique et dans le monde. Chers camarades, la jeunesse n'est pas le futur, elle est le présent. C'est avec elle et grâce à elle que nous pourrons bâtir une paix durable, un travail décent, une justice sociale réelle. Je vous remercie de votre engagement et surtout, je vous appelle à agir avec courage et ensemble. Merci.
Thank you so much. Yes, so the youth is not the future, it's the present. Well said, and we need to systematically integrate them. We've heard some other people today also tell us about how women need to be integrated so that we actually reach that full potential of building peace together. These words that and the words of the previous speakers, the floor is open for discussion. So you can raise your hand and we will give you the floor.
Yeah, and also if you prefer, you can also just write in the chat and we will read the comments from there.
Yeah. Maybe I can just start by saying something that based on what Hervé just said and also related to the conflict in both Sudan and DRC and probably many more conflicts. You were saying that the youth organizes, among other things, online, for example. That's quite interesting. I think I would like to hear from the public how is it with working with movements that mostly organize online, for example, nowadays? If there's anyone that would like to elaborate on that. But I see now some raised hands, so we might take that along the way. Let's start with the raised hands. Can we see the order, Emily, or?
I can, yeah, usually the first one is the first one that raised the hand. If not, apologies, but yeah, I think the first one is
Karina then, or yeah. Karina Knight Spencer. Go ahead. You're still muted.
You need to, yeah.
Okay, I'm working from France, part of Stop Fueling War, and also a burgeoning Rethinking Security group there. And I'm more and more thrilled to find so many groups working on rethinking security. Of course, we've known about the IPB for a long time, and this introduction to the trade unions is really fascinating. But we can't work just with governments. And I think we have to work with them rather than with their far right or whatever, rather than just saying, well, there are these alternatives, there's another way, we can do that. It's like, okay, you know, going parallel to what they want in a way, as much as we can. But also that there's fear around at the moment. There's fear of militarization, there's fear of nuclear. There's also fear about people taking over your country and migration and all sorts of things you shouldn't be scared of, but there is a lot of fear. Now, if we can use that fear to state that there are ways forward, there are plans, and many of these groups involved here have plans. And we should compile those and like we could have various maps or plans for how to move out of the problem into a solution. Now, the major geopolitics is difficult at this time, but all the civil defense, non-violent training, education in mediation and non-violence and contre-violence as well, would be a good way to say, right, you know, military budget's that, X will get us this. And so we really need to talk to people in civil society to say, it's okay. You know, I mean, it's terrifying at the moment. The world is really changing so fast, but there are roadmaps. And you need to know about these roadmaps, because the only roadmaps they're given tend to be pretty negative from the top down. And that's how we need to, how we get that across. If only we get a Seros or an enormous grant to bring us all together and all different plans to present and, you know, throw it out there continuously the same way you would with a political rally or movement. That would be great. Another thing I'd quite like to ask the last speaker, talking with governments, as I say, is one thing, but isn't it the globalized companies that are in fact running faster and have more control? Reading today how Google is incorporating, working with Elbit, for example, of Israel on AI information. Now, that's not a government decision, it's a business decision. And so, and last time during Trump's reign, there was a lot of companies that said, no, we still believe in, we've got this climate problem and we have to work against the problem and against what we can destroy and work to what we can create and save the planet. So there are good companies, and how you get through to the companies, especially the biggies, you know, that's what we've got to look at. It's not necessarily governments anymore. It's capitalism. And, you know, what is our counter to capitalism, which will protect people? Thank you.
Thank you. That would be to Annika Söder then, if I understand you correctly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We can take Sean's and Tord's questions too, and then we can open for answers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have two microphones in the room here. Sorry about that. I just wanted to also quickly comment on something briefly mentioned by the last speaker, that Russia had abandoned the concept of common security. I agree with that completely, but I think we have to avoid a strict blame game in saying one side only did not or had abandoned the idea of common security. I think it's an idea, unfortunately, that was abandoned not just by European powers, but generally around the world since the end of the Cold War. And I think there was a heavier focus at that point on militarization. With this, I'd like to say it's important when we are talking about common security to avoid black and white thinking, that there are strict good guys or bad guys on any side, and that any conflict has to become a win-lose situation. Either you win everything or you lose everything. The common security concept that we've been working on is one where we hope it is a win-win situation where all parties can really benefit from increased security and from cooperation rather than competition and division. So just to say, I think it's very important as we continue the discussion today and moving forward that we don't create strict good, bad definitions, black and whites, but allow for some further nuance. And that's not a criticism specifically of any one speaker, but it was just my comments were triggered by what I had heard in the speeches. So thank you.
Thank you, Tord.
Now I'm allowed. My microphone is activated. Thank you very much for this excellent webinar. overwhelmed. I started to be active at the UN conference 1972 in Stockholm, and then it was very clear that these issues are totally interconnected. It was also very clear that we can't wait for the states. This was a time when we suddenly were able to unite the knowledge of the peace movement and turning the environmental movement to become much more radical and addressing the anti-nuclear power issue. We are in the same situation now in terms of that we see a very, very strong opposition between all governments and the movement. There is no government today that we can trust whatsoever, especially the Nordic ones, who are more militarized than anywhere else in Europe, more or less. And then we have to understand, how can we then promote common security? Well, then we have to build on the linkage between the movement and address this concern. When I was young, it was obvious that Sweden was guilty of plunder, starvation, and poisoning. This was a common understanding by the majority of the movements and the parties. This is not the case now. Now everything is placed on Putin, Trump, or whatever villain you wait for. And this links to a little bit what Sean Conner said. We are now doing, which I think it's a way, I put it in the chat, we have now a conference in Lithuania, which I do miss here. As far as I can see, Yuri Chelyashenko is more or less the only one from the East in this process here. And this is with the 210,000 refugees from the war zones from Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine in Lithuania, who are under very, very heavy pressure because they start to try to throw them out again from the regimes. Belarus and Russia, they need support. And what we do is to link it to the climate and peace. We need to, which I understood was part of the sustainable newness of the common security concept. So this is one step forward. The next one is Helsinki plus 50. Where we see a very unfortunate development, what was very liberating in the 80s with the liberation of Eastern Europe, is now turned into a very questionable linking, destroying the social rights and limiting the civic rights to only be in those countries, not our country. And here I see a big possibility if we avoid, as Sean stated, the kind of message was claiming that the new thing is that Putin destroys UN Charter. No, he was not the first one. We know that. And if we don't start to address the European situation in the global context, we will play along with splitting us. So my question, especially to Annika Söder, can we start to develop this view and reinvent the OSSE and common security by stating the need for avoiding double standards and create a charter for the civil society, which can be used in all countries? Thank you.
Thanks, Tord, and Sean before him. I think we might turn the floor to Annika to allow her to answer if she wants. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for very interesting and useful comments. Of course, the multinational companies drive the world, and we have some new features that make the possibility of influencing them even more difficult, and that is the what I think was referred to earlier as corporate capture, that you have oligarchies in Russia, for example, in the US, with the new alignment around Trump. You have, of course, in many countries with democratic constitutions, also a strong influence by multinational or national companies. So the question is, what do we do about it? Since the nation state is obviously, since way back, not a counter force to actually embed and guide the companies, and many initiatives have been taken over decades to find a way to rein in the multinational companies with common rules for them to follow, be it on workers' rights, be it on the environment, and so forth. But I believe that with the authoritarian regimes that are now thriving in many parts of the world, we're in a worse place than we were before, where fewer democracies are able to be the counterbalance to business or corporate sector or whatever you call it. And then, of course, you come to think of what can social movements do, what can trade unions do when nation states and governments are driven by the competition between countries to actually get companies to stay in their countries or to come to their countries, and the whole complex issue of growth. And a decade or so ago, a lot of conversations were held on where growth as a concept was questioned. We talked about sustainable growth, we talked about sustainable development, and of course those concepts should be reconquered, and we should find a way to deal with this. And I wanted to unpack this we, because there are so many we's, and sometimes we talk about we, the country of whichever country, or we talk about we as a social movement working together. But this is a very complex matter, and in the present juncture, I can see civil resistance as playing in. I am not in a position to propose that, but of course, workers have something to contribute, or employ people in general. On the black and white, I couldn't agree more than that we have had double standards for a long time. And that in various ways, the West or the United States have been overstepping the rules of the UN Charter. For example, the Iraq invasion is maybe the most prominent example, and we can also remember that then in 2003, France and Germany actually opposed this action, this invasion, and so did some smaller countries like my own country, Sweden. The question is now, will the abuse of the Charter or the use of double standards actually lead to reactions, the reactions that we were used to before, when the main conversation of today, at least in my continent, in Europe, is actually militarization and armaments, and there's very little conversation about negotiations to regain the European security order, to revive the United Nations, to reform the UN Security Council. And so the task is enormous. And if I said that I did say that we cannot trust Putin, it is a strong sentiment in the governments in Europe that Putin cannot be trusted. So we have to take that into account. I believe that the growing feeling is that Trump cannot be trusted either, and possibly not Xi Jinping in China. So the question is, are there enough government forces to make a difference, and how can, in that case, social movements and others take action? Is there a potential for a global peace movement now? Possibly, because having listened to all of you, maybe this is what we should be trying to do. The question is then, what kind of tools do we have to to make a difference. And I think many in this group will sit on that or answers to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. I wasn't sure you were finished. I saw many, 2 hands up more. I don't know if we want to keep going, and then maybe we summarize a little later. Manal, do you want to go next? Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, I'm mute.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to add to this complexity other layer that but being working in different African countries and being in the US now, and I see the rush towards like the issue of the critical minerals that actually it's part of the mining in Sudan, in not in Sudan, in all Africa, especially in Congo, especially in Sudan, many countries. It has a global competition, and that impacted the safety and security on these countries. This is the first layer. So the global competition on these critical minerals in African countries added layer to the suffering of people, and how can they actually how they can solve these problems while there's international interference. This is layer number 1. Layer 2, most of this mining and the resources is owned by the governments of these countries itself because of the corruption. And these governments, they have straight, direct and connections with the powerful countries like America, like European countries, like Russia, like China, specifically those 3, So how this complexity actually can be also added more problems for the African countries to have their own stability, giving that these coalitions that's going between the superpowers, between the companies themselves and the African presidents, African governments. So this is also adding more layers on the complexity.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Manal. And again, we are seeing how many layers there are that has to be analyzed, and the more complex the problem, we know that, I guess, all of us here in this room, the more complex also the solution has to be, and we need to tackle the problem from all the different angles. But I think that's why it's so important to have this conversation and to keep in mind that, yes, obviously the political willingness is one of the major, I would say, obstacle we need to face, but we also have tools. And again, civil society can be a powerful actor, and we are a powerful actor. So just also to go back a little bit to the concrete steps we can really take, and to go back to have a little hope also. And again, I really believe that coming back all together is already a very important step that we took. And these connections, as we are mentioning, are the very essence of achieving peace. And when I mean connection, again, is like the peace movement. We have been hearing from peace activists, but also the trade unions, but also climate activists. So really, again, just to keep in mind, please keep coming back to this forum, and also try to somehow really think of concrete steps we can take together. I know it's difficult, and for me also, as maybe a very young activist, I call me myself. So sometimes it's really frustrating to see how complex the problems are, and especially when we talk of for example, all the economies. I mean, I know there are so many interests behind this, and it's easy to say, yes, we want peace, but then it's very much more difficult to achieve it. But that's why we need to focus really on the solutions. And I just wanted to mention that once again. I think, yeah, Kia, you also had a question before, and I hope now the microphone is working. So please, the floor is yours.
You're speaking to me?
Yes, if you
Okay.
hear me. Okay, now it's working. Amazing.
It's all about trust. That is true. The question is then, the global south, how should they be able to trust the present world order? That since the Second World War has made anything possible to keep the global south in poverty. And that's obvious. After the Second World War, the first thing that happened was a lot of colonial war, first in Asia, then in Africa. And so the trust is not there. And it's continuing. When you're talking about Africa just now, it's just a plundering of natural resources that is going on and so on, no trust. And before China intervened, it was no development in Africa. Okay, if you go to Europe, everybody say we cannot trust Putin, but do Putin have any trust to trust in the Western world? No, of course not. They have breaking all promises to Russia. And the Bolsheviks doctrine from 1992 point out the main goal for the US is to see that Russia is not becoming a great power again. And everybody knows that. And then you had the Minsk agreement, where Angela Merkel and Holland in France afterwards said this was never intended to be implemented. And then in December 1921, when Russia asked questions to the West, what is your intention with Ukraine? No answer at all. So the trust is not there. We have to rebuild the trust and start talking or have diplomacy, and then let China industrialize Africa without the Western world trying to stop it. That's my comment on the present world situation.
Thank you. Do we have? I know that the discussions this morning from the regional groups also focused on practical steps. So I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be on global level. We can also speak regional level. If anyone wants to share anything from this morning, you're welcome to do so. And also, I mean, you can also share any kind of activities that you are planning, just like Tord did before. And of course, we will keep in touch by email and update with conclusions from these discussions. But the floor is open to also talk about like regional steps.
Yeah, maybe very briefly before I give the floor to Sean, I think also raised his hand. So one very concrete, not small, but concrete example that came out from the regional discussion I took part this morning was, for example, to reappropriate the social media platforms, because as we mentioned also, I think in this session, they can also be part of the problem, because we know how many fake news they are circulating and miscommunication, but at the same time, the comment was that we should take back the narrative, and social media can help us with that. And especially, again, if we join forces across the different movements and create content that has a different scope, which is not increasing fear, as one of the previous comments also was about fear. And for me was a very, very important point, that now the narrative is again concentrating only really of fear and create this new, I just remember now the news we had some days ago here in Europe, that we need to prepare and have a bag in case of war we need to be prepared for 72 hours. And I was like, what are we talking about? We don't need to talk about this. We need to talk about how to prevent that. And so just to say for a concrete example, I guess it would be really to try all the means we have to getting back, reappropriate ourselves with a more peaceful narrative that concentrate, in our case, on common security. Sean, do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you. I come back this time more with some concrete recommendations for steps that I would propose, some things that we've had in mind from the International Peace Bureau, but of course would appreciate your feedback and to work together where we have shared interests. One that's very important is with the redefinition of security, or our attempt to really question, is security strictly state security or is it human security? I think the biggest thing that is needed there is really outreach. So more people are questioning themselves, what really is security for me? Is it that my state defends itself against another state, or is it that I have food on the table, that I have a stable job, that I can take care of the ones I love? And this, I think, is a longer term goal of the redefinition, is to really have people outside of our movements, people in regular society, critically thinking about what security means to them, rather than accepting ways that perhaps certain political leaders might talk about security. Another part, when we talk about fairness and equality between states on the international level in geopolitics, our first speaker for today's session spoke about the UN Pact for the Future. If you haven't read it, I recommend reading it. Certainly, a lot of what's in it is very vague. There aren't strict timelines for when things need to be done. But there are a lot of important considerations, including changes to the United Nations itself, changes to the Security Council, empowering the General Assembly of the United Nations, so on and so forth. Promotion of peace building, and particularly connections with the UN Secretary General's 2023 New Agenda for Peace, a document that shares a lot in common with our Common Security 2022 report. In terms of ways to build trust, in terms of ways to stand in solidarity with one another, each other's nations. So I think we have some documents we can work from and that we can use to pressure our governments. Maybe they're not as specific as we would like them, but they could still be very interesting campaign tools and something that we use moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I would give briefly the floor to Todd and Joseph, and then I'm afraid we need to quickly move to the closing remarks, so we have a couple of minutes time before the next session. So Todd, please. Now you should be able to. Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry. Yeah.
As an environmentalist, I have no illusions about China or Russia, even if I know that the West is equally bad in Africa. My point is that all the governments at the moment are a bit hypocritical, claiming that they refer to UN Charter, etc., etc. So what do we do then? Nobody trusts each other. Well, we have to be pragmatic, of course. Try to find the small steps that are possible, but also see that the trust now has to be built among the movements. That's where we have it. And that it's including then trying to create common agreements together and avoid these double standards. I see Yuri Sholashenko here, who's going on trial in Ukraine. I can't accept that to make strong support for the Russian political prisoners, we have to also support those who are under repression in Ukraine. This is the way forward in small steps, sort of, but also in understand uniting these movements now who claim, so we get some further. I have here, I put in the chat this ideas concerning the Helsinki thing, and there is also important things going on. This Belarusian organization who has to claim to be terrorist extremists, so they are based in Vilnius nowadays, show how now the Belarusian refugees are committing suicide, they are harassed, etc. If we start to focus equally, then we can come forward as civil society and also start good relationship with governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord. Joseph? Yeah, the mic is open.
Okay, fine, thank you. So I maybe want to be saying something a little bit complicating here. I think it's obvious that we need greater movement collaborations and to be struggling for human solidarity. But I think we need to keep our focus to a degree on the lessons from the original Common Security Report, right? To remember that on the one hand, that grew out of the base that Olof Palme could work from was the combination of powerful social movements in many of our countries, plus Gorbachev's understanding of the need to transform the Soviet Union. And that's what led, to the Common Security Report, and then obviously to the INF Treaty and the end of the Cold War. I think we need to understand, I mean, there've been references to it, that we are living in an especially dangerous time now. While the nuclear danger over the Ukraine war has decreased, we face a very real danger of an accident, a miscalculation over Taiwan, leading to escalating great power war, including possible nuclear war. There's the dangers in the South China Sea. And we are working in a situation where the governments involved, Russia, China, the United States, are, to put it politely, authoritarian, but actually, in some ways, moving toward totalitarian. And I'm reminded of a former senator from the Dutch Socialist Party a long time ago. He'd been involved in the resistance to Nazi occupations. And what he said was, when the elephants are battling one another, they trample the insects and the small animals on the ground. But it's the responsibility of those insects and the animals to find ways to manipulate and move and contain those great powers. And I think that's the responsibility that we have at the moment. And also, just to say in terms of I love you, Sean, but to say in terms of changing the UN, that only comes when we can change the views of the great powers. We have to find ways, and part of it is through building people to people and other analytical exchanges of those of us who still have our voice within the great powers. But I think as we're talking about common security in this period and talking about human survival, as we were in the early 1980s, we need to face the real huge challenge of moving these, if you will, neo-totalitarian states to allow for human survival. It's not the goal, it's not the ultimate goal that we want, but survival is rather critical.
Thank you, Joseph. And yes, survival is rather critical. I think we couldn't have a better final sentence there. I know we're running late, but I really wanted to give the possibility also to Yuri and Mona to have a very brief, is that okay? Very brief contribution. Then we can go to, if they are still here with us, Oscar, Jordania, and Philip for the closing remarks. Just to remind all of you, we will have then the final session at 4 with the regional discussions. So keep that in mind. We will post in a bit the link for the next session also in the chat for your convenience. Yuri, the floor is yours.
A lot of good thoughts, and indeed, I agree with many in analysis of Tord and Joseph. I think we discuss politics a lot, but what is needed for peace building in the world is permanent reminding to people around about values, about eternal things, about the vision of the world without wars, about the vision of the world where everyone refuses to kill and therefore there are no wars. Common security is wonderful idea, but conscientious objection to military service is important individual contribution to building common security, because it is not only between nations, but it is also between the people and individuals. The media provide people a picture of inevitable war, and we need all the time to challenge this, to say that you cannot achieve peace by killing the enemies. The only way to peace is to listen and to say and to discuss and to find common ground. So values-based conversation, instead of engaging into toxic politics driven by militarism, is very important. And we need to engage and build faith communities, because when distrust is usually instrumentalized by militarists under the old formula divide and rule, people who in their life dedicate to faith are more open for these values of peace, of love, which help to build trust, and the notion of service, of individual responsibility for universal peace.
Okay. Thank you, Yuri. Yeah, I would just say at the end of the day, we always need to come back to the human side of the individuals. And I guess, yeah, that's also where awareness and really, I think peace education really comes also in and plays a role in redefining also what we feel we can do. So for time's sake, I will ask if Philip, Oscar, and Jordania wants to have any final remarks to wrap up this session. I see Philip. Whenever you want, please just take the floor. Maybe we start with Philip, and then we go to Jordania and then Oscar. You can be very brief. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. We've had an intense couple of days until now, and intense discussions this afternoon. I think there's a very strong and clear message to the IPB, to the Olof Palme Institute, the Centre, and the ITUC, is stay the course. There will be remiss of us not to continue this cooperation that we developed until with the report of 2022. And the demand out there is very clear. It is loud that there's an expectation that we should continue. This is important, as the representative of the UN mentioned, that this is a world in transition with an end of certainties. We have an obligation to try to halt the reverse and to hang on to some of those breakthroughs that would be made through the ages, which have brought us peace and democracy and regions of the world free of conflict. We have to be clear about the world we want, and we have to be clear about explaining to people what the consequences of strategic competition actually means in reality. It's something of an abstraction. This week, we saw a manifestation of strategic competition in the global economy where we've had basically a week of economic warfare. Within 2 days, the powers that be, not always our friends, reacted strongly and basically said no and obliged the US administration to change course in quick order. And I think, therefore, learn the lessons from this or take some instruction from it, that those forces coalesced and they made it very clear that this was bad for the economy, and above all, it was bad for people, and it led to a change in course. And I think there's some messages there. I took the message from the UN about be focused. We have such a broad array of issues to deal with, but to build these alliances, build these coalitions, is to try to develop some focus where we can assemble and mobilize and translate that into some form, into action. A lot of comments made about the corporate world, and maybe people aren't familiar with the whole push that has been out there with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Fundamental in terms of the corporate responsibility, not just to respect human rights, but also to take practical measures to deal with the adverse consequences of their behavior. And we can use those in terms of our assessment of where governments are going and in terms of where governments are. Joseph, I'm not sure how much you've been listening in with the time differences that we have. The relevance of common security has been made time and time again, that we will not get a solution to the conflicts that drive this world apart without the adversaries sitting together and rebuilding trust, about rebuilding arms control, rebuilding conflict resolution measures, having the guts to address the new technological issues, having the realization that for strategic cooperation, we need norms and institutions and international law to be respected. And above all, I commend the ITUC for raising the flag for democracy and human rights and peace. My hope is that as a result of this moment, where we've been on the big picture high ground of ideas and of thinking, how can we operationalize all of this stuff? How can we get to the mechanics of what common security means, and for it to bring about meaningful change in the world that we face? At one time, we had those big picture days of Brundtland, Brandt, and the Palmer commissions. I hope that with this work and with the realization of the failure that the path of failure that the world is on, that we have the age of rebuilding peace, and that those adversaries can sit together. USA and Iran this week, USA and Russia in the future, US and China in the future. But we need peace in Ukraine, and we need the rights of the Palestinian people to be respected, and for the two-state solution. And yes, we need women in the picture who will be part of these peace processes. Can it be an age of rebuilding peace? Can these adversaries sit together? Let's try to get that message across, that it's the common security path that gives us a path to that better future, but it will require a magnificent and strenuous effort on each of our organizations' behalf to try and deliver that in practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Jordania, you want to go next?
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, compañeros, compañeras. A mí me parece que este debate, las intervenciones, los paneles, pues han estado sumamente interesantes. Yo creo que nos dan mucha carne para poder seguir trabajando en nombre de la paz como lo estamos haciendo. Yo de verdad que el ver este tipo de sinergias con sindicalistas, con diplomáticos, con académicos, con diferentes personalidades activistas del mundo, y con esa idea de seguir construyendo la paz, pero no solamente que hagamos el análisis, como decía uno de los que intervino anteriormente, no solamente hacer la reflexión, que es importante reflexionar, es importante hacer los diagnósticos, pero más allá de esto, ¿cómo podemos construir esas soluciones que necesita el mundo de hoy? que históricamente el tema de las guerras nos han impactado tanto, pero hoy tenemos otra realidad mucho más cruel, podríamos decir, y cómo adecuamos ese pensamiento, esa visión de paz, esa construcción de paz desde estas visiones del movimiento social, de los movimientos sociales, desde estas visiones de los movimientos sindicales, poniendo en el centro la justicia social, la necesidad de colocar a la justicia social, el respeto a los derechos humanos, el respeto a los derechos sindicales en el centro, en esa búsqueda de paz, esa interconexión que tiene que ver, que hemos hablado hoy también, con las crisis, las múltiples crisis que tienen que ver con el colapso climático, que provocan estos conflictos armados, el aumento de las desigualdades, el autoritarismo, la extrema derecha, todo eso provoca también estos conflictos y deben seguir siendo parte de nuestras reflexiones. Yo quisiera de verdad seguir agradeciendo y reafirmar este compromiso que tenemos desde el movimiento sindical con la visión de la paz, con el trabajo de la paz, y mencionar brevemente algunas de las cosas que me llamaron la atención porque la tenemos en nuestras agendas y me gustó que salieran hoy porque hay que darles calor, hay que seguirlas fortaleciendo. El tema de la visión de las mujeres en estos espacios de construcción de paz, el tema de la juventud, escuchar que las y los jóvenes quieren ser parte de estos espacios, que quieren aportar a la paz, pues es sumamente interesante y hay que tomarles la palabra. Hay que fortalecer también este trabajo que se está haciendo. Y lo otro es el tema de la educación. Educar para la paz. Es necesario construir un mundo de paz, pero para eso es necesario educar para la paz. Mencionarles también unas iniciativas que se están haciendo en la región de las Américas que tienen que ver con la inclusión de mujeres, la inclusión de jóvenes en las operaciones de paz, sobre todo en el Uruguay. En estos días tuve la oportunidad de participar en uno de estos eventos donde hablaban de las mujeres en el mantenimiento de la paz y colocaban en el centro la importancia de lo que hablábamos ayer, los impactos de las guerras en las mujeres, en los jóvenes, en los niños, pero también colocaban en el centro la necesidad de la participación, de la visión de las mujeres en estos procesos de paz. Yo creo que hay que seguir apostando a, como decían uno de los que también intervino, a la responsabilidad individual que tenemos todos y todas en esta construcción de paz. Pero también creo que esto pasa por seguir colocando la visión colectiva de la paz, que eso es la seguridad común, que si tocan a alguien nos están tocando a todos y todas. Y que esa es la visión que tenemos que tener, que no podemos seguir apostando a esas grandes inversiones que están haciendo muchos gobiernos para fortalecer la industria de armas en nombre de la paz. Eso tiene que acabarse. Yo creo que hay una posición muy clara entre todos y todas los que estamos en este espacio para seguir avanzando en este sentido. Decirles que próximamente vamos a tener más reuniones porque esto no puede quedar en el aire, es algo como de lo que mencionábamos, es un espacio de reflexión, pero que también debe llevar una acción, así que más adelante pues van a haber algunas reuniones, las personas, las moderadoras, los organizadores van a recopilar los aspectos más destacados de estos 2 días interesantísimos de conferencia donde tenemos que colocar los puntos de vista que se han puesto en la mesa, y en nombre de la CCI agradezco inmensamente a todas las personas que fueron ponentes, los moderadores, moderadoras, a quienes construyeron, ¿no?, el programa, a las 2 organizaciones, el Centro Internacional Olof Palme, a la Oficina Internacional por la Paz y a quienes nos acompañan aquí por el sector sindical, porque fue un trabajo arduo, pero que sabemos que va a dejar grandes frutos y que nos catapultan cada vez más, nos hacen reafirmar que somos constructores de la paz. Muchísimas gracias, compañeros y compañeras, y sigamos reafirmando esa visión de paz que tenemos, sigamos construyendo, sigamos proponiendo, porque como decía, no es tan solo hacer el diagnóstico, sino también la capacidad de propuestas que podamos tener, sigamos luchando en nuestras comunidades, en nuestros sindicatos y en todo el mundo a favor de ese mundo de paz que cada día más lo necesitamos. Muchas gracias, compañeros y compañeras.
Thank you, Jordania. Oscar, please, you have the honor and to close the session officially.
Yes, thank you, Emily, and I will be very brief because I realize I stand between you and Friday evening for some of us and Friday morning for others. I will echo my colleagues here, of course, and I will first of all thank everyone that participated in the meeting and so actively with questions and interactions. And this is, I think, something that gives us hope for the future, that this is a question that we can gather around and be so very energetic about. Olof Palme was a man of many quotes. And one quote that he said was that longing for a peaceful world was the inspiration for his whole political commitment. And I think that kind of captures what we have been doing here today. I also take with me and thanks all the speakers that's been with us today and yesterday. And I think the cooperation between the civil society organizations, the trade union movement, and the political dimension at the front of the people, and that the people are the ground for this. But I think also we need to expand on that collaboration. We need to work more with academia, like we have seen, and with much broader consent. I also take with me what Mr. Eliasson said, that we must stop working in silos, that we need to come together and work more together and have the human rights as our core value and have the problem in the focus. So I will not talk for so much longer. I do want to thank the I2C very much for the cooperation in this. I want to thank all the staff there, and I want to thank all the staff and the International Peace Bureau for this very good cooperation we have. And as we said this morning, I see this as something we need to continue, unfortunately, but in this very good way. And I'm very open to continue this. For instance, to do also things in practice, to see each other, to have meetings in sidelines of, for example, the UN, UNGA, and other meetings to discuss this in more places and more often. So with that said, I thank you for everything and for all your commitment and closing the discussion. But don't forget that there is also a regional discussion after this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And see you in a couple of minutes on the other session. Thanks.